Often we talk about what the Guru is, who the Guru is to non-Sikhs especially, and often we'll use this term like the Guru is a teacher. But it's such a small way to depict who the Guru was. And all of the Puratan Granths refer to Guru as Sache Patshahi, the true master of both the temporal and the spiritual worlds. I think that this like romanticizing our history, like especially the Puratan Itihas, that's very easy to do because it's kind of cool, right? We were like riding on horseback, we had shastras, we were living in the jungles. It is a natural kind of thing to want to be, right? Especially in this day and age. The other thing is that they kind of miss out why they were mobilizing in the way that they were. And if you look at the entire 18th century, all of the lehers that came about, whether it was like Banda Singh Bahadur's movement, the Dal Khalsa, the missiles, all of those things that took place, they understood for a Sikh how important it was to have political autonomy, to live as free individuals, right? When we look at like our Itihas from 1469, let's say up to 1849, right, give or take 400 years, when Maharaja Ranjit Singh's kingdom falls, the whole history is of sovereignty. Like Ratan Singh Pangu says, Sikh Raj kare ke Sikh lar marega. Either the Sikhs establish Raj or they give their everything to establish Raj. And then only after the colonizer arrives in Punjab, we see this shift towards other forms of activism. Khalistan is a name that the Shaheeds of the Qawm have given the movement of Sikh sovereignty. In the previous decades and centuries, other names were given to it. The actual thing they're trying to establish is political autonomy, right? And I've noticed that, when we have these interactions, that then the penny kind of drops. It's like, oh, I understand that. This is the hukum of the Guru. The idea of like Sikhi and nurturing the Gurmukhi, all of that is tied to, you can't have spiritual liberation without having the political liberty, right? You can't really exist as a Sikh without that freedom to live as a Sikh. The Guru is building parallel power structures. This is why they established their Takht, their Darbar, the army being built. All of it is being done to say that we don't recognize your Raj or the authority or the legitimacy of your Raj. At such a Pacha, they can do that, right?
Podcast series. We're very blessed today. Finally, we've got Bhai Ranveer Singh Ji on the podcast. So thank you so much, first of all, for coming on the podcast. And you've had a bit of a long journey getting down here to London.
I have. It's first, it's been a while coming. I think we've been trying to do this for at least a year, maybe even 2 years. So thank you to you guys for hosting me, inviting me down. And so I flew down from Scotland this morning, and obviously we were just saying before how the flight down is actually quicker than the cab here from the airport. It's just the way things are, right? But glad to be here and part of this conversation. And it's a great thing you guys are doing with the podcast. I know it's got good reach, so long may it continue.
Good. And we were speaking about this offline as well, that we were quite fortunate in 2024 to do podcasts with Bhai Ranveer Singh Ji and Bhai Baljeet Singh Ji as well. And they were saying as well, shout out to them, it'd be great to get Ranveer Singh on a podcast and even involved in those podcasts as well. So, did you get a chance to check out those podcasts? How did you find those as well?
I did, they were great. So much information. It was, obviously I've been around the topic of 84 for a while, having Sangat of those things in particular. Yeah. But even for me, there's a lot of stuff in there that I wasn't aware of. So it was a great watch.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And just quickly, briefly, just tell us about yourself in terms of, well, there's no need to rush anyway, but have you always been into the Sikh circles? Because I know someone like Ranveer Singh, who's brought up with this in his family, but just tell us a bit about your upbringing as well.
Yeah, cool. So I was actually born in Leeds, and Mum and Dad have been Amritdhari from the get-go. So I was born into a Sikh household. Yeah. And I was lucky to have like Maharaj Prakash at home as well. So I've always had that kind of, that environment has been there. Right. Japji Sahib in the morning and Redas in the evening. But actually, like for me personally, becoming a Gursikh and becoming Amritdhari didn't happen until after uni and stuff. Wow. So so I went through school, all that upbringing, and then moved from Leeds to London as well. That was quite interesting. And then obviously university, went through 3-4 years there. And then just before I got married is when I decided that, this is something that, I want to do. And for me, it was really, even though I was born in a Sikh family and there was obviously, Gurbani was there, for me, it was like going to the Gurdwara and seeing like the paintings of our history. And, especially at 84, there's the famous image that was at, I don't know if it's up at Park Avenue, so of Sant Jarnail Singh Ji and the Shaheed Singhs of that time. So, paintings like that, and then also the Puratan Itihas as well. I was always just kind of drawn to it. What does this painting mean? Who are these people? So for me, that was a big pull. So that was in 2009. And then around about the same time, I met Baljeet Singh, Ranveer Singh, the other Singhs from NSYF, and kind of Sangat just grew from there. So that was kind of my journey into Sikhi. Obviously, shortly after that, Bhai Ranveer Singh used to live 2 streets down from me in Hayes.
Okay.
So, we had Sangat as well. And obviously, there was a bit of involvement with basics at the beginning.
Yeah.
So, I was quite lucky in that sense that I had good kind of Singhs and Sangat around me, especially as I was coming into Sikhi.
If you don't mind me asking, just going back a bit in terms of growing up in a house where you had Guru Nanak Dev Ji Maharaja at home, parents Amritdhari, was there a certain reason why you didn't kind of come on the path early, if you get what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, not that I can pinpoint. I think, our kind of upbringing was that, it was very kind of maybe normal in the sense that, you are a Sikh, so you do your part in the morning and, evening, and we took part in obviously Prakash and Khalistan as well. So we did all of that. So I guess in many ways, we probably thought we were living, as Sikhs, right? But we just, at that point, hadn't taken Khande Bhat the Amrit, right? So I think that was more of a kind of an informed decision based on, there's more of a yearning, obviously Guru did Kirpa as well, but there is that. So it was, I can't think why it didn't happen earlier.
It was didn't feel your parents never forced you?
No, there was never that sense of like, which I think is quite good, because I've heard like, horror stories of like people taking quite young and then, whatever reason going off the path. But so I was quite blessed in that way that there was no force there. But having said that, there was, priority was given that, it was clear that we are Sikhs and we have an identity. This is important to us, Gurbani and knowing about Sikhi was important in that sense. So really blessed in that way. Yeah.
When did you start getting interested in more like Sikh sovereignty and Raj and that kind of
stuff? That came later. That came like after I took Amrit and then, having Sangat of the Singhs. Really like the kind of the in point, I guess, was 84. Like for a lot of people, I think, especially in the UK of our generation, like, when 84 happens, just trying to understand why did it happen, why were the things there, all these questions. Because you hear obviously of all the other accounts which vilify the Sangharsh and, Sanji being in Akal Takht. So for me, in terms of sovereignty and Patshahi, we'll come on to the book in a little while, but that was the inroad that, I had to understand why did 84 happen, so many questions around that. So that's naturally then when you start looking at 84, you can't then avoid Sikh sovereignty and Patshahi. It's very much an integral part of it. So that all of that began around about that time. Yeah.
And what's quite interesting, and it's a question, G, is that so growing up, in a household, Amritdhari family, Guru Nanak Dev Ji Maharaja, was there kind of a disconnect from this idea of the Sangharsh and all these topics? Was you aware of them when you're growing up, or is it just something that, okay, I've heard about it, but I just don't want to look into it, or I have no interest right now?
So it was very much the latter in a sense that it wasn't really talked about.
Yeah.
Like we had, again, that very famous picture of Sant in the house. From as far as back I can remember, it's always been in our house in Leeds and in London as well. So, but it was never talked about. And it wasn't as if it was like suppressed either. So it wasn't just like, we're not going to talk about it. It just never kind of came up in, everyday conversation. But those like, memories or those, reminders of that at the house and just Sikhi generally were always kind of there. Yeah.
I think that's important as well, that we normalize it in the household, right? Even if you don't necessarily have to speak about it openly, if you just have the nishaniya there, that as a starting point, right? And when you have young kids, that might be a good way to introduce them into the topic. Then obviously down the line, you can discuss it and bring them on further, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And we do the same thing. We try and do the same thing in our house now, where we've got like pictures of shaheeds on the walls. Right. The kids naturally then will ask questions at some stage. And obviously I'm quite a fond reader, so I've got a collection of books, and every now and then, especially the older kids now, as my oldest is 12, he will ask, what's that book about? And, so it's a great way to get them involved as well. If you expose them, whatever you expose the kids to, they're going to naturally, go towards that, right? Especially like in a day and age where there's so much, of a pull from screens and YouTube and all these other things. Having those basics in the household, I think, are hugely important for Sikhs.
We were actually going to ask about that later as well, about the screens and how it affects your writing. But you've written multiple books, right? Now, 4, is it?
4 books, yeah.
4 books. And what kind of got you into that path of like writing and then eventually publishing?
So I started writing Patshahi Mehima in 2014. And the idea very much was, I wanted to understand. When I started it, the idea wasn't to write about Patshahi. The idea was really just to go back to 84 and write a brief kind of history of 84 up until the present day. Because a lot of the accounts, as you guys will know, they, like I said, vilify Sikh resistance. Sikhs are made out to be these religious fundamentalists, and none of that made any sense. And but what I realized was that to understand 84, you had to go back to like at least 1978, and then to understand how we got to that point, 1947. And then slowly I ended up in 1849. I was like, hang on, Maharaja Ranjit Singh's Raj, how did this come about? Who were we, for all these years, for all these centuries? So then gradually, when I went back to like the root source, and then I kind of stumbled across the Puratan Granths, I was like, we have like a treasure trove of knowledge here. And the thing is, like the Granthi Sahiban in the Gurukars, they have this vidya because this is what they learn, right? When they're learning in those indigenous ways. But often, because of the language barrier, sometimes it doesn't necessarily get translated across as much as it ought to. So for me, the actual book Patshahi Mehima took 7 years to write because one, I was doing it part-time because I was working still, but then also like I was literally having to, kind of unlearn what I thought I knew, learn new stuff, and then go again by centering the narratives that emerge from those granths. Because people often talk about some of the contentious issues that exist in the granths, right? But one thing that's unanimous across all of them is how they center sovereignty and how they revere Guru Sahib Sache Patsha. Often we talk about like what the Guru is, who the Guru is to non-Sikhs especially, and often we'll use this term like the Guru is a teacher. But it's such a small way to depict who the Guru was. And all of the Puratan Granths refer to Guru as Sache Patsha. And Sache Patsha as in the true master of both the temporal and the spiritual world. So for me, it was a really eye-opening experience. There was so much learning that took place in that process. And what I realized was that actually, even though there is this vidya that exists within these Puratan Granths, a lot of the work that's been produced, especially in English, there's a huge gap here. Like a lot of people, again, when I was coming into Sikhi, they recommended like Khushwant Singh's work, for example, right? It's a very kind of almost like a staple book to go to. He does a really good job up until the point of around about Maharaja Ranjit Singh. And then his narrative shifts to the point where he's referring to the Gurdars, the Gadri Babbe as like terrorists. He's adopting the language of the British state. And he does the same thing for the Jujarus of the Sangharsh. So that never settled well with me. I was like, how can you go from understanding, because clearly he understood the importance of sovereignty because he's talking about Maharaja Ranjit Singh, Banda Singh Bahadur, the Dal Khalsa, all of that. But then there's a shift. So then when I realized actually that they need to, for us to fully understand what took place in 84, we have to have that grounding of Patshahi, which goes all the way back to Kartarpur Sahib. So then that's why Patshahi kind of became bigger than just, the book became bigger than just 84. It became a revisiting and a rewriting of Sikh history through this particular lens. And at the same time, then I had the opportunity to offer a decolonial narrative, because obviously a lot of the works that exist, especially from Khushwant Singh, he's trained in that colonial logic. So that's why he's referring to the Jujarus as religious fundamentalists, or the Gurdas in the same way. That's just his frame of reference. So actually, by centering like Gurmat and looking at Sikhi from a decolonial lens and challenging Western impositions of who we are, the very framing of Sikhism, that in itself is a colonial thing, right? So then the book allowed me to do that as well, because I'd opened up the scope much wider.
What's really interesting as well, because I was going to ask you what caused that shift. And if you look at the early 1900s and late 1800s of Punjab, before that time, we had the highest levels of literacy, education system during Maharaja Ranjit Singh's times and stuff, right? But then when we think what actually happened, what caused that stuff, one theory, or like we'll never discuss with other people who've done research in this area, is once the kind of British took Raj of Punjab, and they instilled their schools, that caused one of the biggest shifts in perspective, right? Because all of those people that grew up in those schools and kind of took on that colonial mindset, they actually came out, and even the Sikh, Muslim, Hindu, they all had their own reform movements, which came from that frame of reference of a colonial mindset, studying through those colonial schools. So it's really interesting to see how that kind of affected and changed the Panth and changed the trajectory of the Panth, right? So like, what's your kind of take on that?
Yeah, that's super interesting actually, because that this idea of change the trajectory of the Panth. I agree with that to an extent, but also we did still have the likes of Sant Jarnail Singh Ji emerging, 100 years afterwards. So because they were connected to Sikhi, and that kind of because of their upbringing, because of their time in the Taksal, the environment within which they were nurtured, for them, Guru was everything. That was the center of their world. And so this idea of like the religious and the secular, or any other kind of philosophy or worldview that was imposed upon the so-called educated, post Singh Sabha period, really, they were kind of unaffected by that. So it's important to acknowledge that even though there was a shift there, and even that the Singh Sabha movement, I argue that actually the Singh Sabha movement emerges due to an absence of sovereignty. Like if we still had Patshahi in terms of physically expressed under Maharaja Ranjit Singh, really there would have been no reason for this Singh Sabha to emerge in the way that it did, because their main priority was to really reclaim our identity. Until along the way, because of their, because of the effects of colonization, it did have it did warp perhaps their understanding of things and how it is they're projecting. But even then, even within the Singh Sabha movement, we have the likes of Bhai Ranveer Singh and Professor Puratan Singh emerging, some of the most prolific Sikh scholars of our history, right? So I think it's important to acknowledge that, yes, they were dealing with the onslaught of the colonial encounter, which is both the physical reshaping of the Punjab, and also then the education system, eradicating, indigenous schools of learning and replacing them with their own worldview, right? So there obviously was that. But I think a big part of it was that they were just, they did the best they could, essentially, right? And despite that, even though we can critique them now in hindsight, we still have, offshoots of real kind of unapologetically Sikh, mobilization, even through that period, the Gaddar movement, the Akali Leher, and then obviously all up to the 80s and the 90s.
Well, obviously in hindsight, it's easier to say now and criticize, but it's hard to find that balance. Where do you draw the line? Because we've kind of lost a lot of those indigenous historical practices, right? And I feel that nowadays, a lot of the youth, they're like, oh, we want to go back to Puratan ways, we want to do this and that. But then what actually constitutes as the Puratan ways? And what have we lost compared to now? Because even if you compare to Muslim reform movements, before they were quite heavily Sufi in that area. And now when the Wahhabi movements and these people came, they lost a lot of those indigenous practices. And they were like, this is all, it's shirk, and it's against Islam. So it's interesting to see how that's become more prominent. And at the same time, in Sikhi, that became more prominent. But we label it as missionary mindset now. But what's your opinion on that stuff as well?
I think that this kind of romanticizing our history, especially the Puratan Itihas, I think that's very easy to do because it's kind of cool, right? We were riding on horseback, we had shastras, we were living in the jungles. It is a natural kind of thing to want to be, right? Especially in this day and age. But I think the other thing is what happens in a lot of that, especially this is my personal opinion, is that they kind of miss out why they were mobilizing in the way that they were. It's because they understood fully the importance of sovereignty and Patshahi. If you look at the entire 18th century, all of the lehers that came about, whether it was Banda Singh Bahadur's movement, the Dal Khalsa, the missiles, all of those things that took place, they understood, for a Sikh, how important it was to have political autonomy, to live as free individuals, right? So, and I think in today's day and age, we have this kind of facade of freedom, because especially I guess in the West, because we live in these kind of modern states, and we do have a certain degree of freedom. But as we know, even recently, there are certain boundaries even within this setup that you can't cross. So if you want to talk about Khalistan, for example, if you want to talk about your own way of being in this world, at some point you're gonna have that conflict, right? So therefore, I think sometimes when we talk about the Puratan ways and maybe dressing a certain way, whatever it might be, it has to go beyond the surface level of just on the outward. It has to be a genuine commitment. And if you really want to honor those things and their ways of being, then you need to be honest about it and have an honest kind of reflection of how can you actually walk on that same path. And that's where a lot of these, I do a lot of talks and stuff, and I was in California a couple of years ago, and we're talking about Patshahi and sovereignty. And ultimately, and I'm sure this will be the case this evening at the university, the question comes about, well, what do we do? What can we do, right? Everyone wants to know. That's the most hardest question. It's the easiest question to ask, but it requires a lot more than just one word answer, because we're so disconnected, I think, from Punjab specifically. And so that's why I think then it becomes easier to pick up how we once were. And I can just live that in this modern 21st century. But there's such a disconnect there. So there's a lot of kind of self-reflection required. But for me, ultimately, it comes back down to understanding how integral Patshahi was right from the beginning. When we look at our Itihas from 1469, let's say up to 1849, right, give or take 400 years, when Maharaja Ranjit Singh's kingdom falls, it's just the whole history is either sovereignty. It's either Ratan Singh Pangu says, Sikh Raj kare ke Sikh lar mare. Either the Sikhs establish Raj or they give their everything to establish Raj. And then only after the colonizer arrives in Punjab, we see this shift towards other forms of activism or, So there's a lot of, I think if we're honest with ourselves, everyone understands, what maybe is required, but there are different ways to achieve that. Everyone can offer different seva on that objective.
What's interesting also during that period of Maharaja Ranjit Singh's time, the missile period, it's we spoke to Bhai Ranveer Singh from Virasati Asthan Seva, and they've done research, and they basically found that the most expansion and kind of institution building happened at that time. The most amount of asthans were built, or like decorations was put on them, or like remade at that time. And not only that, they use traditional techniques that were used during the Guru Sahib's times, which we've kind of lost nowadays, right? We have a bit of disconnect. But even that aspect of building institutions and building actual physical places for Sikhs, it's interesting to see what happened then and like how it impacted us, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a big part of that is because it was our Raj, so therefore we were empowered to do that, right? Like it actually begins before, like even during when Sardar Baghel Singh marches into Delhi, he marches into Delhi four different times, and you know, for example, they're able to levy, you know, tax on Delhi. The construction of the main Gurdwara that stand in Delhi today, Ragab Ganj Sahib, Sees Ganj Sahib, all these things take place because the Sikhs have the power, right? They're ruling essentially. So these developments and institutions, you know, like heritage sites, preservation, arts, all of that sort of stuff, that really can only be done to its truest sense when you have that political autonomy and that control to do so without a fear of, you know, state repression or persecution.
Do you think you have to do both at the same time? We have to have people getting sovereignty as well as building institutions?
I don't think there's any drawbacks to that, no. Because there's a lot of talk today, you know, nowadays about, you know, institution building, right? And, you know, for example, like Khalis House, just as an example I can speak to, you know, the idea of having our own publishing house, having multiple.
So if you want to just introduce what is Khalis House, how did it come about?
Yeah, okay. So Khalis House is an independent Sikh publishing company. It's a not-for-profit though. And it came about because when I was writing the manuscript for Patshahi Mehima, I submitted it to a couple of the kind of mainstream publishing houses, and the response that I got was, again, because the language that I've used in the narrative is very unapologetically Sikh, right? And I'm not shying away from Khalistan and all these so-called taboo subjects. The response wasn't favorable. So then I spoke to a few of the Singhs and I said, look, I know we do have established publishing houses, but I think there's an opportunity here to do something a little bit different. So really it was kind of born from a very kind of selfish personal, you know, perspective that, you know, I want to get this book out there. And also like when you self-publish, you have full control over everything. Like, you know, how it's depicted, how much time you spent on promotion, all of that sort of stuff. So it gave me that sense of autonomy that, you know, I'm in full control of it. And actually when we announced it, Patshahi Mehima ended up becoming the 5th book that came out. 4 of the books were published before that. So for me, that kind of instantly told me that there's a need for this as well, and others were looking for a similar type of outlet. Because even though, you know, self-publishing, it does sound quite appealing, but there's a lot of work that's involved in that as well. Despite the fact that you now have places like Amazon where they offer you really good service, but they take a huge cut as well. So you know, part of institution building is creating wealth within the community as well. So so that's kind of how Khalis House came about. And now it'll be 5 years in June, and we have published over 30 brand new books. And we've worked with writers from across North America, the UK, Europe, Australia as well. So that's how Khalis House came about.
What's interesting is as well, you do competitions for authors, right? And like any good like writings that you pick up, then you go and publish them and support those authors basically.
Yeah, and that was a part and parcel also actually of establishing the publishing house, is that we wanted to encourage aspiring writers that, you know, your work is good enough. Because again, we've published, I think the most amount of books we've published in terms of the genres is children's books, surprisingly. And I didn't think that when we first started, because even though there are quite a lot of children's books, it's not a saturated market. That people are still looking for children's books, right? And as a parent, I can speak to that there is a real need for these books to continue to come out. So you know, encouraging and you're supporting, you know, upcoming writers. So we had the Khalis Lekha contest, which we've started, whereby, you know, there's a prize at the end of it, and also there's a publishing contract for the best submission. And what that also gives us is it allows us the opportunity to control the narrative, which is a big thing. Like, you know, for example, there was one year where the theme was set on talking about 84. You write a short novel on 84, and there is a lot of talent in the Panth out there. Like people are good at writing, so it just gives them an outlet, you know, to bring that forward. And then because of, like, you know, my understanding of how important narrative is, I'm able to then obviously, as a kind of editor, kind of see that through to publication.
And it doesn't even necessarily have to be like non-fiction, right? Because you've published a lot of fiction stuff, like poetry.
Yes.
I remember seeing is it Ranveer Singh?
The journal.
His journal of like poetry and stuff like that. So it's interesting to see the wide variety of stuff you've got just from that initial step of, even though it might have been a selfish thing, often a lot of these sevas come out from selfish ideas, right?
Yeah.
And like even with us, we were just like, we want to listen to good content, so let's make podcasts.
Yeah, absolutely. We're trying to say all the other content.
Stuff we're interested in,
That's
right?
True. Yeah. And speak to guests. And just taking it back a little bit, one of the points you're speaking about, G, when it came to this idea of the mindset, and we spoke about this on another podcast as well with Baljeet Singh and Shamsher Singh, and I thought it was a very interesting point, and it'd be good to hear your thoughts on it as well, that when they were, I think it was a point that was raised that sometimes your enemies know you better than you do. And I feel like, especially when you're speaking about in the more modern day, it seems that the average Sikh has kind of forgotten this mentality, like you said, Patshahi, right? And that is something that we're trying to instill back in people today, right? What are your thoughts on that in terms of that? If more people had this mindset, then the way we would act would be much different within the Panth.
Yeah. I think that kind of also speaks to this idea of like prachar generally, I think. I think a lot of focus from what I've seen over the past maybe like 20 years or so is that there is this focus on taking Sikhi out of the Gurdwara, out into the streets or out to non-Sikhs, which is great. But ultimately, from what I've seen, I think there's a lot of work needed within our own community, within our own families. I can personally speak to that. Even in the Gurdwara, obviously we're based in Scotland now, and in fact, your viewers can maybe do this, but I think if we were to do a survey amongst the Sangat coming into any Gurdwara across the UK and ask them about sovereignty, Patshahi, why it's important, all the rest of that, I would argue that maybe 80 to 90% still don't understand the significance of it.
Interesting.
Because Patshahi, and this is based on the fact that I've kind of lived in this world for a little while, right, in terms of the interactions that I've had. And a part of it is because like the history is so glorious, so it is quite comfortable to sit with that. Like we were once great warriors, right? Hari Singh Nalwar's name comes up a lot, Maharaja Ranjit Singh, all these great warriors from Itihas. And then there's a disconnect then between that and the current day Sangharsh, because Khalistan is still a manifestation of Sikh sovereignty, right? It's just one form of bringing sovereignty about. So I think like the focus should be on Sikhs, and actually I'd argue that the non-Sikhs, unless you find, kind of the rare individual who is genuinely interested, maybe from a historical perspective, from an academic perspective, or even maybe he's coming into the path of Sikhi, that's different. But that, what is it about it that will make them interested in it? And it used to be that people would think, because of the, let's talk about the injustices that have happened to us, but look what's happening in Palestine right now. We're literally seeing a genocide unfold on social media for the past like 2 years, and everyone's still going about their lives. So that for me showcases that we can make all the noises we want, but that mindset, that sovereign source, has to be developed and nurtured within our own children, our own families, our own Sangat, local Sangat, and then the wider UK Sangat as well. Because like I said, it's been there right from the offset. It never really went away. It's something that wasn't introduced by the creation of the Khalsa or the raising of the Akal Takht. It begins in Kartarpur Sahib right from the beginning. So that's something I think that we're trying to really focus on.
And we're going to get to that as well in terms of kind of tracing the history and seeing those examples within our Guru Sahiban and so on. And I think another point that came to mind was this idea that like we speak about our Itihas and we glorify, which we should, in terms of how beautiful it is and so on. And there we look at whether it's like a Baghi or a Padshah, like as in either you're a rebel or you're a king, right? Until you become a rebel, you're always fighting that injustice. And I think in today's world, that shift has kind of happened, where in the present day we don't when I say we, I'm talking about maybe you see generally across the board that we don't glorify our history as much. We then like you get these narratives of people saying that, that person, was a separatist, or they kind of follow the narrative that's given by the West, right?
Right.
And I think maybe that, like guessing what you're saying, that kind of contributes to the problem. Maybe like in today's Parachar, I've seen it myself, where especially when I started doing Parachar, I'd focus a lot on the Guru's period and speaking about that, but we wouldn't really speak about the present day and the present issues that are going on. And do you think that kind of adds to the problem, that way problems today and the things that we're facing in the Panth, we're not speaking about them, and it kind of gets forgotten about, if you get what I'm trying to go with what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, I get what you're saying. It's difficult because the present is still unfolding, right? So like, it's a very real thing. If you want to talk about Khalistan, you might have to be mindful of where you say that, whom you say that between, right? Because the other thing is, like, people don't really, even within Sikh circles, don't fully understand what Khalistan is. A lot of their understanding of Khalistan comes from the state narratives, which has continuously vilified and criminalized, anything to do with Khalistan. So I think a part of it is like, that's why it becomes, like I said, easier to talk about our history. And history is important, like you said. But bridging the gap is important. And for me, that's why like my focus has been on like showing how ideologically the pursuit of Khalistan is so linked to our entire history. It's just, this is just Khalistan is a name that the Shaheeds of the Qawm have given the movement of Sikh sovereignty. In the previous decades and centuries, other names were given to it. But the actual thing they're trying to establish is political autonomy, right? So that's for me, and I've noticed that, when we have these interactions, that then the penny kind of drops. It's like, oh, I understand that. And that really, for me, is the biggest kind of aim here. Like, let's say, there was in the next, 20, 30 years, there's an armed struggle that stands up in Punjab, right? And they're vying for Khalistan. Now, it might be the case that not many people travel from outside of Punjab to fight in that movement, right? The liberation struggle. But at the very least, they understand the ideological position of why they're fighting for that. And even if you look at 84, and from my understanding, only a handful of Singhs actually went back to Punjab during that movement. So, and that's astonishing if you think about it. This is the epicenter of the Sikh world being attacked. But yet only a handful of things actually went back. So I think for me is like, whether you choose to go back or not, or whether you choose to, offer something in the way of seva, whatever that might be, whether you do that or not, you should have an understanding of why it's taking place. And there's a lot of disconnect between that. A lot of it is time it's shown as, just a separatist movement, just a fundamentalist movement, or just these religious fundamentalists who are, doing this. Or there's a lot of like, human rights discourse that, we're doing this because we want justice. Because I don't know, there's been so much injustice that's happened to the Sikhs post 47. But actually, no, it's not even that. It's because this is the hukum of the Guru. Like the Guru said that, like the idea of like Sikhi and nurturing the Gurmukh, all of that is tied to, you can't have spiritual liberation without having the political liberty, right? You can't really exist as a Sikh without that freedom to live as a Sikh, is what I'm trying to say.
What's interesting also, like you mentioned about like Palestine and that, and they kind of go in cycles about like they kill each other and like there's casualties on both sides, right, which is wrong. But then when you look in historically, like America, the US, they did like 2 nuclear bombs on innocent people, killing hundreds of thousands of people, right? But somehow they weren't the villains. How did they get to the stage where they become like the heroes? And nowadays we're arguing about these like battles between Israel and Palestine, but America got away with that. And like, how do we get our own narrative in that way where we're actually seen as like in a positive way? Or does that even matter?
As in how we're perceived by others. I'd say probably less so, but it's important for our people to understand, what the significance is. And even like America, you don't even have to look at like the bombs they dropped in like other places, but what they did to the indigenous peoples, like the natives of America, right? That's an entire podcast series in itself. But yeah, I think a part of it is like, because they've cemented that power upon bloodshed and genocide, they have control now of, you can say the media, the narrative, like Hollywood films, all of that has an effect. If you look at most of the films that came out like in the 90s, the narrative that was projected, films that I've watched now I quite like, the villain was that the Arab, right? And then the savior was his white dude coming to fight them. Rambo, True Lies, all these things. So this has an effect, and they're able to do that because they've got the power, and they've got all full control.
It's interesting because one day I was watching a film and they were like in one of these Arab countries, and I was just thinking to myself, imagine being a Muslim watching this, and every film that you watch is basically your people being killed by Americans, and what it must do to them mentally, right?
Absolutely.
So that's quite crazy when you think about it. I want to go back again, but it's linking anyway. It was I've forgotten the point. It's such a good point, but then you went to nuclear bombs. So now I forgot what I was going to say. I was like, how did you just bring nuclear bombs into this? It was so random. What was you speaking? We talking about
I was talking about like how sovereignty is an integral part, like of the Panth in the beginning. And to live as Sikhs, to this kind of spiritual freedom is tied to our political liberty. And in order for us to live as Gurmukhs, we need to have that political autonomy.
And okay, I think it's come back. Some of it is to do along the lines of when it comes to what you're saying about Sikhi and the mindset, it's quite interesting because And you've been touching upon this, which I think is fantastic, and especially in today's world, this is the prachar that is needed. Two things, that's what it was. The first thing was this idea of needing to do more prachar for people in-house, which the way when you say it, like I said, the penny drops, like, oh, you're so right. Like, obviously all prachar is important and we appreciate that, and Guru Sahib did that, but it's not to say that we neglect one thing over the other, right? And right now, you know, we have built up a community and there's that lack of basic knowledge of Sikhi, right? Like you're saying, in terms of if you were to ask, you know, did a survey, like you said earlier, and majority of people wouldn't know. And another thing is actually understanding who our Guru is, because I guess in today's world, especially when I grew up, I just saw Guru Sahib Ji as just a spiritual person,
right,
just that one dimension. And especially when you speak about this in your talks, in your book, that actually there was a lot of things that the Guru was doing, and we play off as just, oh yeah, they started another language, for example, generalizing, or they built a city. But there's actually way more behind that. There's way more of a thought process behind that. Building up from Kartarpur Sahib, Sri Guru Nanak Dev Ji to Sri Guru Gobind Singh Ji, where they've just, a lot of things have happened over 200 years. So that's something that I think we definitely need to be instilling more in people, right? Within our Sikh Panth.
100%, yeah. Even like, the book Patshahi Mehima is divided up into two parts. The first part looks specifically at the Guru period. From Kartarpur Sahib to Anandpur Sahib. And then the second part is 1708 onwards to the present day. And actually I begin with like the Udasis, because often we kind of miss the Udasis out. We talk about like Patshahi as being manifested by the Guru's Darbar. We go towards Kartarpur Sahib, which is great. But if you look at like the Udasis, like,
sorry, can you explain to us, Sangat, what do you mean by Udasis?
The Udasis, so the travels of the Gurus. So Guru Nanak Dev Ji travels in all four directions over approximately a 22-year period, have various interactions with different individuals. And actually there's a Bani in Guru Granth Sahib Ji, Siddh Ghost. And in Siddh Ghost, which is discourse with the Siddhs of the north, the Siddhs ask Guru Sahib, what is the purpose of your Udasis? Why are you traveling around? And the Guru gives a very specific purpose. And it's really important because often, like from what I've heard over the years, you know, the Guru went on their Udasis to speak truth to power, or, you know, to give people that understanding of that connection to Akal Purakh, which is all a part of it. But the Guru's answer is Gurmukhi khojat pe Udasi. Darsan ke tai pek nivasi. That I've started these Udasis in search of the Gurmukhs. So it's very purposeful, right? And then you'll know more than anyone, in Gurbani, there is so much reference made to how the Gurmukhs are nowhere to be found. Bhai Gurdas supplements this, right? He says the blind are pushing the blind into wells. And, you know, Bhai Gurdas is so radical in terms of how he speaks about people of the world. And when he depicts like the individuals that Guru Sahib has interactions with, if you look at the Janam Sakya as well, some of the other Puratan Granths, they all talk about, you know, that Guru Sahib is very much kind of comes with a no holds barred approach. He doesn't really spare anyone if there's falsehood, tyranny and oppression there. So, you know, these interactions that Guru Sahib has with people within South Asia, then also then traveling west as far as Baghdad that we know of, having those interactions, ultimately the Guru then returns to Punjab having not found the Gurmukhs. And therefore Kartarpur Sahib is established to create an environment in which the Gurmukh consciousness or Sikh consciousness can emerge. And that emerges where the Guru's Darbar is centered. You have institutions like Sangat, Pangat, Langar is initiated. Guru Nanak Dev Ji is also said to have started the Manji system as well. So even though Guru Amritdhari kind of solidifies it and expands upon it, that actually that begins with Guru Nanak Dev Ji, and then the Dharamsals as well. So all of that institution building from the early stages is, you know, I link it back to that initial question of, you know, the purpose of the Udasis. And obviously within that there's the wisdom of spreading of Naam and Shabad and, you know, connecting people on that front. But very much there is I would argue there's a bigger socio-political aspect to the Udasis. I mean, if you think about it, they're traveling to meet with other people of the world, right? So they're very much, they're not rejecting the world like the renunciants have done in the north of the country. They're saying that, you know, we to really bring about that spiritual kind of revolution, you first need to be living free of oppression. So because that doesn't exist, and then that's why they critique other systems of governance. So very famously calling Babar Jabar, you know, and then each of the Guru Sahiban build upon that. Where the Guru's Darbar is then evolved. You have the Manji system becoming the Masan system, really wide, expansive network of representatives. There's one account that says that the Guru's representatives are stationed from modern day Kabul in Afghanistan to Dhaka in Bangladesh, 2,000 mile distance.
That's crazy.
It's constant. And I think I'm quite critical about the early British accounts because of the fact that they framed the Sikhs within the categorization of Sikhism.
Yeah.
But even within some of the earlier accounts, they talk about how, the Gurus had established something distinct and standalone to other power structures. Like there's one writer, Joseph Davy Cunningham, who talks about how Guru Arjan Patshahi had established a state within a state. Now, again, when we talk about today's day and age, the state means something quite specific, right? It's tied to the idea of the European nation state. But what that shows us is that Cunningham recognizes there's a separate jurisdiction between the Guru's Darbar and other forms of governance and society building. And so all of that stems from the way in which the Guru mobilizes right from the beginning. Then later on you see the raising of the Akal, Takht, the building of forts, the raising of an army, the waging of battle and war. And even that, often it's depicted that the Guru went into battle as a kind of reaction to oppression. But it wasn't always that. They also went off in a proactive way to defend, the sanctity and the sovereignty of the Guru's Darbar. That we're going to do whatever we can to protect this, because that's what, when you build it, when you bring in a new worldview into the world, ultimately you're going to have to defend that.
Yeah.
So that's a part and parcel of it as well. So so in the book, and then we're also running this course in Scotland at the moment, we're looking specifically at that, how the Gurus built that. And it doesn't, like I said, Raj doesn't begin with Maharaja Ranjit Singh. It's centuries before that. It's just a different manifestation of Raj.
And that's really cool because I've been fortunate to relay this with the house for many years, but not actually looked at it in that way, like how you're explaining it, and it kind of thinks, that you kind of think that's so interesting. Like Guru Sahib be traveling, even the Manji system, like you said, because I'm sure it's in Nana Prakash when Guru Sahib goes to Sangladeep, Sri Lanka, Raja Shivnab sets up, like he sets up a Manji there under Guru Sahib's hukum, right? So it's interesting to see that all these things were happening, and that way you it's nice to do vichar, because when you look at the Udasi, the travels that Guru Sahib went on, it's like they went for multiple reasons. Do you get what I mean? And there's more to it. Like we can never find the full extent of what Guru Sahib is doing, and they're beyond, right? But it's just like, that's so interesting what you're saying. If you just come back to Guru Nanak Dev Ji Maharaj, like, all the things they were doing built up to something where they'd seen the whole dunya, what it was like. They couldn't find the Gurmukhs. It's like, okay, now I'm going to show you how it's done, basically.
Yeah. And also, people often ask this question of like, a Guru brings Naam, right? And did Naam exist before the Guru's arrival? Because also in Guru Granth Sahib we have the Bani of the Pagats, right? The Pagats speak of which is why the Guru has given them that place. They speak of a similar teaching and wisdom. But the biggest difference between the radical Pagats, Bhagat Naam Dev Ji, Bhagat Kabir Ji, Bhagat Ravidas Ji, is that the Guru builds a Panth. So whereas their kind of critique is left at the place of calling them out, for example, the caste system or wherever it might have been, calling out, oppression and tyranny and injustice. Guru Sahib goes beyond that because they're mobilizing on the actual ground, they're building an actual way of being and a society, like Guru Arjan Patshahi says, Kartarpur Karta vase Santan ke paas. That, in Kartarpur, the Karta themselves resides there amongst the society of the saints. And obviously Sad Sangat is such a huge concept within the Sikh tradition, right? So it wasn't left, the Guru's critique wasn't left just in the realm of idealism, that this is how it should be. The Gurus offered an alternative, themselves. The Guru goes into battle themselves. Shahidi takes place on 2 occasions. There's multiple failed assassination attempts. So all of that. So when you look at it from this perspective, and all this gyan comes from those Puratan Granths, which is why centering that narrative. When you look at it from this perspective, and then you look at it from Sikhism, the religion, the world's apart. It makes no sense, but it makes sense from the colonizers' perspective, because their main objective is Raj. They want to take over Punjab, right? So let's just portray these people as just this, and therefore we have the right to rule them.
We're taking that lens now of what it should be. If you don't mind, just I'm not saying you have to go into full detail, but it's up to you, G. Feel free to, because we like long podcasts anyway. When it comes to Sri Guru Nanak Dev Ji Maharaj Ji coming to Sri Kartarpur Sahib, and as Bhai Sabji says, like Bhai Gurdas, that they kind of take off the attire, and now they've not retired, but they've come and got this base now in Kartarpur Sahib, where initially they were in Sri Nankana Sahib, Sultanpur Sahib, and they've settled here. How are they building that institution, whatever you want to call it, that Raj, that Patshahi, how are we seeing that through a city, through, you know, language because of Bhai Ranveer Ji, and, you know, how are these things happening? Just for somebody now who's maybe heard this history and I was like, actually, let me hear it from this angle, a different type of angle when it comes to it.
So there's multiple sources from the Puratan Granths that you can go to, like obviously Santok Singh's work, in Suraj Prakash, Bansavri Nama is another good one, the Janam Sakhiya as well. But I probably couldn't recommend one particular account because it is kind of fused amongst all the different accounts, right? But the general kind of the overview we get is that Kartarpur is central to the early formation of the Sikh Panth, because everything then takes place from Kartarpur Sahib. So like I said, Guru establishes Sangat there, and so it's a really important thing. And that there was this tradition in South Asia where people would flock around somebody who was deemed to be, you know, a sant or a fakir. But the Guru is also introducing concepts that go against the grain in terms of Brahmanism, right? So the very famous things, you know, people already know about, like the discrimination amongst the caste system of, like, for example, on food, you can't really sit down with somebody of a low caste. But Guru Sahib breaks that barrier by introducing Langar, that you can do that. So these are like, to us in today's day and age, they seem quite like they're just given, because we're used to it, right?
Yeah.
And obviously we don't live in a caste-ridden environment in society. But for those days, it was completely radical and revolutionary, to the point where, like, even Guru Sahib, Guru Amritdhari Maharaj is summoned by Akbar, because the Brahmins complained that, you know, this has been ongoing for a couple of gurus now, that this is what they're doing here, first in Kartarpur Sahib, then Khadur Sahib, you know, and so Guru Amritdhari is summoned by the Mughal emperor because of complaints raised by the Brahmins, because they saw that there was potential for this to be a threat to their control and their authority. Guru Angad Dev Ji also, like, you know, there isn't they focus on the Gurmukhi script and, you know, the opening of wrestling akhade, but they're focusing on building an environment where the Gurmukhs can nurture, but they also remain critical of the other systems of governance. So we have, like, multiple accounts, where the point of me saying this is that often it's believed that comes afterwards. And actually, you know, that the first 5 Guru Sahiban were very much, you know, like you said, pacifist and saintly and just as spiritual, but it wasn't, because the Guru's jyot is the same from Guru Nanak Patshahi to Guru Gobind Singh Ji. So their actions are all aligned, the ideology is all aligned. But Kartarpur Sahib, like, I think the other thing is with Kartarpur Sahib is, when you compare it to, like, Anandpur Sahib, there's a lot more available, accessible papers, research, you know, artifacts. So it's and for example, we have Professor Padam Singh's work, the Bari Ratan, phenomenal piece of work. So it's more accessible. The more further back you go, you have to then start relying on, like, some of even the Persian accounts. So we don't really have an exact depiction of, like, you know, the day-to-day happenings. But that being said, by Gurdas, the Avara, the 11th Var, the 11th Var, by Gurdas does a really good job, because he lists the names of Gursikhs that formed the early darbars. So from Guru Nanak Patshahi all the way through to Guru Har Gobind Sahib Patshahi. It's in quite summary form, but you get names. There's like 300 names in total you get from across those darbars. Individuals, you know, of different trades or different skill sets that were coming. So Guru was, you know, that appeal was there. And then later on in Sikhi Bhagatmala by Mani Singh Shaheed, they elaborate upon that 11th Var, because the Sikhs wanted to know in that time, you know, who were these individuals. So we have references, that's what I'm saying, but they're kind of scattered across these grants. So there's a kind of real, almost like a comparative study needed to be done. But one thing's for sure is that you can't deny how central Patshahi was. I'd argue that the Sikh Panth would not have developed in the way that it did had it not been for the sovereignty expressed by Guru Nanak Patshahi in Kartarpur.
And one point that came to my mind, because when I think it was quite big, is that all our Guru Sahiban had interacted with the leaders at the time, like Guru Nanak Dev Ji with Babar, and obviously the Ittihas, that they gave them the Raj. But the point is that if someone's trying to ignore this point and say that it's not true, it's that, but all of our Gurus are speaking to the leader, the Badshah of the times, and that in itself just shows that the Gurus are making it clear we're here to interact on that level and kind of take over, right?
Yeah, exactly. And not just, like, I would argue that not just interaction, but the Guru is building parallel power structures. So but this is why they established their Takht, their Darbar, the army being built, all of it is being done to say that we don't recognize your Raj or the authority or the legitimacy of your Raj, and they can do that as such a Patshahi, they can do that, right? Like Bhai Gurdas, he uses this word, Deen Duniya da Patshahi Behmotaj Raj Karaya. That Guru Nanak Patshahi established a Behmotaj Raj, and Behmotaj means, so it's a Farsi, it's a word from the Persian language. It's comprised of two things, Be and Motaj. Motaj means when you're reliant on something, and then Behmotaj becomes self-reliant. So Bhai Gurdas's Vara are really important because they give us a lot of context. And he's saying that, the Deen Duniya da Patshahi, Guru Nanak Patshahi, has brought about, a Behmotaj, an independent Raj. And the very famous Pankti Gurbani, Nanak Raj Chalaya, Sachakot, Stani Neev there. It doesn't say Nanak Mazhab Chalaya or not. So language is really important as well. And again, even in Gurbani, there's multiple references to the Guru's Takht, and how the Guru Sahibs sat on Takhts. And only a king would sit on a Takht, right? So it's undeniable when you look at it from that perspective.
What's interesting as well is, just going back to the Virasti guys, they made a good point that the way that the Guru Sahibs made the asthans, that even the significance of having 4 doors, not only did it challenge casteism, but also gender, because a lot of even Musliman asthans, they would have 1 door for women, 1 door for males. So even like all these little things we don't actually see, but now once you study them, it's crazy to see the level of the Gurus.
And even like the location of like Khadur Sahib and these places, okay, when we go now, they're Gurdwara Sahibs, and they become more kind of heritage sites in many ways, right? Or just places of worship. But in their heyday, they would have been fully functional towns in that sense. And even like the decision to choose those places was quite strategic because they were close to like the rivers, the river Bias River or the Ravi River, whatever it might be. So the idea of like, water is important in all of this nation building. So, and even like Guru Sahib choosing those places. So for example, there's a Sakhi where Guru Angad Dev Ji is told to relocate to Khadur Sahib because Guru Nanak Dev Ji's sons are kind of vying for the throne, right? So to avoid that internal conflict, they go there. And a similar thing happens later on, as I'm sure you're aware. So Guru Sahib is kind of navigating, internal conflicts, which obviously come to head with Prithvi Chand and, the Minas and Tir Maliya later on. And then also the external, the Mughal forces, and then the Sikhs continue that with, conflict against the Afghan invaders and British and the Indian state. So we've always had that. And that's because Sikhi offers something different, ideologically, philosophically, not just that, but also of how it is to exist in the world, and being in the world, which is the biggest conflict that there is.
And when it comes to like now present day, or like if you want to talk about historically with Akal Takht, people say that was the central seat of power, of sovereignty for the Panth. But then at the same time, you also hear this alternative that Guru Sahib also made the Guru Khalsa Panth as like the Panchma Takht, or like they Khalsa Mera Roop Hai Khalsa. Guru Sahib made them the Khalsa, the Guru. And in essence, even the Sarbat Khalsa, that has its own sovereign power with the Panth, right? So how do you kind of like balance these both, or how does it work?
I don't think we've ever had like an attachment to a particular building in that sense. So the Akal Takht was raised by the Guru, but we know from our Itihas that Guru Hargobind Sahib Patshahi relocates to Kartarpur Sahib because Darbar Sahib is taken over by Meherwan, and who colludes with the Mughal Empire. And so the Gurus don't return to Amritsar Sahib for a 60-year period. So Guru Har Rai Sahib Patshahi, Guru Harkrisan Sahib Ji, Guru Tegh Bahadur Ji, they're based in Kartarpur Sahib, more so towards this area, right? So there isn't never that attachment to a particular building or place. The association or the attachment for a Sikh is with the Guru. So wherever the Guru goes. So like you said, after the 10th form, Guru Sahib passes on their authority to both the Granth and the Panth, right? So that's important to understand as well, because we have, I think, especially now with the way things are in Punjab with the Akal Takht, there's a lot of talk about freeing the Akal Takht. I get that sentiment because it's important to have a free Akal Takht, but ultimately the Guru hasn't tied us to any kind of imarat, any particular building. It's more so, do you have that sovereign sort? And also, like you said, the Khalsa has been empowered with that Patshahi. Hum Patshahi Sat Gurde Hanne Hanne Lai. So that's where we obviously, it's different as well for us.
Because even like there was no historical Jathedar in that sense of Akal Takht, right? It's more of a modern concept. But it's interesting to see how Guru Sahib kind of decentralized power.
That's a good way of putting it.
It means that anywhere in the world, Khalsa can shape the Panth, right?
Yeah. It's super interesting. Decentralizing is a really good way to put it, because you're not tied down to a particular place or a particular structure, a particular family lineage or whatever it might be.
So what's your take on this, like whole make Akal Takht like the Vatican of the Sikh Panth.
It's never been that. It's never held that status.
Yeah.
It's not like a priesthood, is it? I mean, we had like Bunge and, the famous, in our Ardas we say, Jonkiya, Chande, Bunge, Jugo Jugotal. But that was never like from this priestly class, like, that it'd make it the Vatican-esque. It was more so because that's where the learning would take place. And
also, there's no Bunge left.
There's no Bunge left, no, of course. Yeah. The British took those as well.
But I guess you could say wherever we make asthans or we make a place of learning, that kind of becomes the Bunga, right? Like shout out to Ranveer Singh from Australia. He started a Vidyalaya there.
Right.
He's teaching Raag Kirtan. That's kind of become like a Bunga.
Yeah.
There's many places in the diaspora where people have created these places of learning. So
100%. Yeah.
So I think Bhai Gurdas says, God under a dharamsala, that every house would become that dharamsala, right? That place, and like you said, decentralizing and so on, so kind of spreading that out. Anything else?
But sorry, the important thing to notice with that though is even though the power was decentralized, people had the upbringing and the idea of sovereignty and Patshahi, and they had the same goal. And that's what I kind of think we've lost. A lot of people aren't on the same page of what is Sikh Raj.
That Mukh Nishana is so important because people will levy that charge against the missiles as well. The missiles always used to fight. They did fight. They had falling outs and whatever happened. But ultimately, when it came to like Panthic Masle, they would come together. And then eventually you see that in 1765, then Sikhs actually then ruled Punjab in the different missiles. So having that overriding objective is really important.
It might be a bad example, but it's kind of like in present day where you have the internal fights between Jathebandi, but if something big happens in the Panth, everyone puts it to a side and comes together. So it's kind of that North Star thing, right?
It's funny, I think by Gurpreet Singh saving Punjab, he's like, we can argue about these little issues after we get Khalistan.
Of course.
Don't have to fly over.
The thing is, it's an important point because we get distracted with it. Like another big thing that I've noticed is like, you guys will both be familiar with this as well, like the Gurdwara, right? How can we have Khalistan? We can't even run Gurdwara. These are small things that and it's almost human nature to have falling outs over, how a certain class runs or how a certain thing functions. Ultimately, when you have Raj, these things will probably still continue. It's just the way things are, right? But we get sidetracked and therefore people will say, well, look, they can't even do that. How are they going to... I would say, look, we've had Raj before. In fact, most of our history, the bulk of our history has been spent where we're either ruling or we're aspiring to rule.
So now you've raised it about Guru Gas. But how do you kind of see Sikhs coexisting, living, like we're obviously Ghulam under this Charities Commission in the UK, or most of the Gurdwara are under the Charities Commission, and there's loads of recent examples of how they've kind of moved the goalpost of what is allowed and what isn't allowed. Like even the most recent example in Singh Sabha Slough, they're now apparently telling them to take down the Khalistan banners which have been up there for 40-50 years since the start of the Guru Ghar. Free speech is gone down the drain, right? So like, how do you coexist in a Sikh sovereign mindset while living in these Ghulam structures?
It's really difficult. It's really difficult because there was like a few years ago, there was a big kind of movement towards setting up charities because it made sense, because this idea of like charity seva, it goes hand in hand, right? But what we've seen over the past few years is that, like you said, they've shifted the goalposts. Because ultimately the Charities Commission is still answerable to the UK government in terms of how it's regulated. Even though it's independent, there are certain things that a charity cannot be seen to be saying. So I think for me, like one of the things that with Khalis House, I can really speak to that, is we took a conscious decision to not register as a charity, and it's just a private company, and there's less kind of regulation in that sense. You've still got to submit your accounts, financially that's got to be above board, but essentially, you have the, I guess, the autonomy, the power to control the narrative and put out what you want. So a lot of like, political parties, for example, are, independent companies and trusts, whatever. So I think, but I think generally speaking, we're so tied to this idea of like charity. The Sikhs are really good sevadars, Langar and all that. So then it becomes like, well, it makes sense to be a charity. Everyone vies to become a charity because you get the 25% or 20% gift aid. So that helps as well, right?
Make sure you guys donate as well.
You make sure you donate, But in terms of how do you navigate that, it's really difficult because ultimately at some stage, like I said at the beginning, when you're talking about Sikh political mobilization, then you will inevitably go up against the state. I think we have no problem in highlighting how we did that and how good we were at that from the Puratan Itihas, even from the Guru's Itihas, right? We proudly celebrate the Shahidi of the Gurus, right? And the stand they made. For some reason, because it's very much a real thing now, we're almost like, well, we shouldn't do this, or it's just the way things are, I'm afraid. It's just,
Yeah, another interesting thing. A lot of Gurukaras in UK, the way they set up their constitution is if the Gurdwara ever dissolves, all of the assets actually go to SGPC
right.
like in Punjab, right? But hopefully that would never happen. The Sangat wouldn't allow that to happen. But like even this fundamental structure of having a committee and a constitution under the British law, how does that kind of work in a Sikh Raj sense?
Yeah, so obviously we've never had the committee system prior to the British arriving. Our system was a Panch Pradhani, more of a kind of a collective decision-making body. In terms of like Gurdwara, like so, if I can maybe flip the question and say like, would Gurdwara continue to exist in this way if Khalistan was established tomorrow? And I would probably say no, they wouldn't, because how can they? Because for me, the Gurdwara is very much similar to what a Manji Tar was in the times of Guru Amritdhari Maharaj, whereby they were representatives of the Guru's Darbar, right? So I see the Gurdwara then as an embassy. If the main kind of sovereignty lies in Punjab and Khalistan has been established, we have all these hubs around the world, and they would function as embassies where Sikhs can go to have their needs met. There would be an additional service or seva the Gurdwara would provide in terms of Langar, and because that's Bhai Ranveer Singh Nabad describes 6 main facets of a Gurdwara, right? So that for me is like the ideal way in which the Gurdwara would function. But if it was, and I guess a lot of the problems today emerge because of the lack of sovereignty. That, we don't, in terms of governance and regulation, that ultimately there is this kind of loggerheads when it comes to having pictures of our shaheeds up, banners being taken down. From a Sikh-centric perspective, it's absolutely fine to do that because we're commemorating somebody who stood for righteousness and dharam. But from the state's perspective, they label them as terrorists because they're allied with India. So that's where you have then this conflict. And that conflict will continue to exist, I think, and probably even get worse over time as the UK kind of deepens its bonds with India.
And another interesting thing I just found up, I pulled it up, is there's a British board of Jewish communities where all of their like kind of decision-making political power is in Britain. And on their actual constitution, under the aims and purposes, they've written, take appropriate action as lies within its power to advance Israel's security, welfare and standing. So this is a British organization of Jews, and their whole aim is representing Israel basically and pushing Israeli sovereignty here. But like that's unheard of for Sikhs to do that. And if we were to do that, we would be vilified by the British government at this current time, right? We couldn't put that in our constitution.
No, we couldn't. But the thing is, that's not a surprise given how Israel is a British invention, right? The Balfour Declaration, Israel comes about as a state because of the British intervention. They never existed before then. So that doesn't surprise me. And they'll always appease their allies in that sense, if it's in their interest, as any sovereign power would do in that sense, right? So yeah, I can't see that that a Sikh organization doing something like getting the backing from the UK. But it's interesting because we still have this mindset that
it can't happen.
Not just that, but like we're proud to be British, right? If I just shifted to that, it's like the world wars. It comes up every single year. It's a big thing. And despite the fact that we've had Jallianwala Bagh since then, we have the invasion of Darbar Sahib since then, the dismantling of Punjab since then, yet we still kind of persevere with this. I'm proud to be British. What specifically is it you're proud of in terms of British values? And I think personally, what it actually comes down to is that comfort. Because we live here, so we kind of benefit from living here, right?
I feel that one thing that you mentioned earlier, which stood out to me, is bridging the gap. I feel this is such a big thing that we've become so disconnected in certain things that we do, and now it has been sold to us that we think is like the Sikhism narrative. Like one example we gave earlier is that this idea of a charity, becoming a charity within the UK. But then when you think about what their definition of charity is compared to ours, it's very different, right? But we think, it's charity. It's the same thing. So we kind of almost fall into their boxes of what they define for us what a charity should be. But it's very different. So I feel like even when you spoke about Guru Sahib Ji earlier as well, and that they face their own problems, right? Not to say obviously we say our Guru is perfect and they weren't the cause of those, obviously, unless they were trying to push the right narrative, but as in like the politics in the families, like they were able to navigate through all these situations whilst they're doing their Sikhi Prachar at the same time. So again, whether that was dealing with the Mughal Raj that was trying to, persecute them, attack them, whether that was their own family members trying to kill them, like Priti Chand trying to kill Guru Arjan Dev Ji's son, Guru Har Gobind Sahib Ji. But they still had that that connection to non-Bani at the same time, whilst navigating within the world through these challenges and establishing Raj. But it seems like in today's world that those two are, like we already mentioned earlier. To be honest, I'm just kind of telling you what's going on in my mind. I'm learning new things right now, doing vicharda. Is that those two things are completely disconnected. And those that are non-Bani driven, I'm generalizing, so no one get offended, especially people in committees, right? Or the opposite side. Those that are non-Bani driven are one way completely, and those that are more politically driven are kind of more the other way. I'm generalizing again. No one get upset. But there's not really much of that bridging of that gap of, like Sant Ji, you could say, is a great example of that, right? They had both, right? And that was what was helped navigating them through this situation. Because then when you look at Chowdhury's commission, in my head, because one thing I learned a long time ago from a Gurmukh was just don't be asleep. When you're doing things in life, just don't be asleep to the fact that, is this the right thing to be doing? And that's not me here saying today that, you know, basically should be a Chowdhury or whether it is, whether it isn't. It's just the fact that, have we had that conversation as Gurdwara, as organizations, that hang on a second, especially the way things are going now with the Chowdhury's commission and the pressure they are putting on not just us, all of us, that you can't have these conversations in your own places, and they can't even themselves define these terminologies. But it's like, why are we so asleep to this stuff? And I guess that's where the tie-in comes in.
The annoying thing is when other people are so unapologetic about it and nothing happens to them. Like, what level of compromise are we going to do? Are we going to take until we actually wake up and change the way we actually define ourselves in these spaces, right? And then even if we do redefine ourselves or our institutions in Britain, we're still going to be redefined in a British system. Which is a problem.
Yeah, I know. There's a few things that come out of those points. And the first thing is, like, you know, this thing about the Charities Commission and, you know, institutions, organizations facing problems. I think it's getting more attention now because they've put the pressure up a little bit.
Yeah.
But I was lucky enough to spend a bit of time with Khalsaid. I worked with Khalsaid for 4 years, right? And worked quite closely with Ranveer Singh. And those issues, they were facing those issues then, because obviously they're based in Punjab, they're doing actual work in Punjab. There was loads of, Ranveer Singh himself will tell you how many issues they face in sending money to the Shaheed Parivars, for example. It's a very big thing that they couldn't, language was important, and they had to unfortunately navigate those conversations, those kind of predicaments, when really they shouldn't have had to do that, because it's very clear that, you know, this money is going to a good cause. It's helping the families of the Shaheeds. But it's because of the pressure that was put on them as a charity under the Charities Commission. And what we're seeing now is because of what's with these high profile assassinations and what's happening with this transnational repression, even cases here in the UK, they're just up in the ante in that sense. And I do think it's just going to go more that way. Especially with the rise of, like, the way in which the world is going towards almost like going towards fascism again. So as Sikhs, as leaders, as, you know, leaders of institutions, that's something we need to be mindful of. You know, is it worth having a charity for the sake of that 25% gift aid, or whatever the reason might be previously, or do we just kind of, you know, reevaluate that? And, you know, the other point you said about
disconnect between the political and spiritual.
So that essentially comes from the side of the secular and the religious, because from a Gurmat perspective, actually it should be those who are of the avastha that ought to be leading in leadership, right? And when you give the example of Sant Jarnail Singh, it's a perfect example. Somebody who spent years in the Taksal, in that environment, under the tutelage of the sons that they had above them, right? And even like Guru Nanak Pacha says, you know, Takht behe takht ki laik, that only those individuals who are worthy of sitting on a throne should. And then they say in the next Pankti, Panch Samayan Gurmat Payak, that those who have conquered those 5 vices. But you see, here in the UK or any Western society, if you look at the life of a politician, anybody can become a politician. Doesn't matter what their moral character is, or
a committee member.
Or a committee member, right? or what scandals there might be behind them. You know, that doesn't. It's like, and that's because of this secular religious divide. That your religious spiritual life ought to be private in your own home, and that's you. In the public domain, it doesn't. None of that matters. But for Sikhs, it's the opposite. Like, our leadership really is built upon this. Your character actually matters. Like when Nawab Kapoor Singh is chosen, he's a sevadar of the Panth, right?
Yeah.
So there's so many examples like that, and I think we with it's a committee system, whatever it might be, we've kind of lost sight of that. And then therefore when like Naujawan come forward who actually have spent time in Punjab, you know, at Taksal or at the Dal, or have learned Santya, come forward to take on these leadership positions, they're like, these guys are just radicals or fundamentalists, but AI kind of thing, right? But it's kind of sad as well that's the predicament we face. But that was never the case.
It was one punkti that comes to mind. It doesn't link to this specifically, but it's used a few times. Guni Gyani Behemata Bakaya. Those that are Gunis and Gyanis, they would come and sit together, right? Like the complementing each other, right?
Yeah.
Those that might have a bit more experience within the world. Obviously, you want the complete package in one person, but they would come together and they'd sit and they have these discussions. And I guess I think in today's world, it's going more that way, where we've got more people involved in these spaces now and having these conversations, which is so important. And maybe that has happened because of the pressures that we're facing now, but it's in one sense it is definitely a blessing that we are starting to have these conversations. I also believe that Guru Sahib is doing everything and they're navigating us in these ways, right? Into these kind of spaces and so on. So
and you know what also is interesting, I was just googling it now, because there's loads of different terms for like democracy and epistocracy, people who are qualified to lead or to be in power, right? As opposed to just having a democratic vote. But then I think Guru Sahib takes it a step further, where it's not only should you be qualified and have the knowledge and skill, but also you need to have the spiritual aspect.
100%.
Yeah. Now, because without the spiritual aspect, those people are affected by the Panth Vicar and greed and all that. And then obviously power corrupts.
Yeah,
It's
absolutely.
very easy to get corrupted without having the spiritual side.
Yeah.
So that's what's probably the most unique thing about the Sikh sovereignty kind of in a more westernized lens,
100%.
right?
And the thing is, like, this is really important, because especially in this day and age where a lot of the youth are kind of aspiring to become MPs, and that's fine. If you want to become an MP, my personal opinion is, and you recognize that your priority is to represent your constituents, right, to the best of your ability. No, there's nothing wrong with that. It's a job in that sense. But the problem is that when that becomes a pinnacle of Sikh leadership, or what it means to be a Sikh leader, right? And there's another punkti that came to mind where Guru Angad Padshahi says, Ilt ka nao chaudhary puri kure thao nanak gurmukh janiye kal ka eho neao. And Kal, like we talk about Kal Jug, and often I think we got confused that Kal Jug was just then. We're still in Kal Jug, right?
it's getting worse as well.
This is why Bani is like, applies today. So if you can do a critique of all the Western societies, look at what's happening in America right now, that punkti applies so much to what's happening there, that there is just falsehood there. And the Gurmukhs know this to be the type of justice that's been delivered in this age of Kal Jug. So again, that to me points towards, that Guru Sahib was pointing the Gurmukhs towards the alternative, and not just talking about it, but actually leading by example. And then the sovereignty point comes in.
The other thing is, I see it so much with the elderly, and in like even committees, they've discussed this. They're like, the CEO of World Bank is a Sikh.
Oh man.
And it's like, but so what? What does that mean?
So cringe. It's so bad.
What have they done for the Panth though? That's the question, right?
Yeah. But the thing is, so they're measuring success based on their position in the world in that sense, and what determines that is their wealth, but they're not looking at like how they got there or what those institutions represent. The World Bank, for example, like you look at all the mass atrocities that have happened and the money that's been borrowed from the IMF or whoever it might be, it's all tied to that. So yeah, it's an issue, but I think that's why, like with the youth, like political education is hugely important, because like I said before, if they want to become public representatives, it's fine, it's good, as long as they don't confuse that with actual Sikh leadership.
And you might see that in other faiths actually, because I remember something that came recently was about this whole idea of Islamophobia. And there was something in the news beforehand about like in the future it may be difficult for Sikhs to speak about their tahas,
right,
especially about things that are to do with the radical Muslim, or like Aurangzeb, for example. So it's interesting how people of other faiths might get into these positions but for their own personal gain,
right?
But maybe we're not seeing that much in our own. Or do you think that's a bit of an unfair statement to make against Apane that are running for these seats, if you get what I'm trying to say?
I think like I don't really know most of the ones on a personal level, but from what I've seen, that they go into these positions with a genuine kind of desire to bring about change. But I remember like when Tan Desi and the other BBs from the Midlands got involved as MPs, I wrote an article about how ultimately it's good for them, like and they should really just focus on representing their own constituents and not get, because the thing is, what will happen inevitably is that it's the first Sikh MP in its gal karniya, like he's going to raise our voice in parliament.
Is it unfair pressure?
I think it's very unfair. Yeah. And if you look at over the past like 5 years, I would argue that in many ways, Martin Doherty, Jaggi's MSP, has probably done more, the same if not more, in raising that voice, right? And that's not a dig at any other Sikh MP. It's more so because their focus generally should be on who they represent. And it's the thing, Parliament does not represent the Sikhs, right? It represents the British populace.
Yeah.
And I think we sometimes get confused with that. They're never going to represent our ideals because there's a clash there. This is the same power that we went to war with on different occasions. Yeah.
But the interesting thing is we spoke to the BARS news guys from Canada.
Yeah.
And they said that the way around this is you increase your lobbying efforts.
Yeah.
So it doesn't necessarily have to be a Sikh MP. It can be anyone in that seat. But as long as you lobby them, and that's what we're lacking in the UK especially. We don't have those power structures that are lobbying.
I would agree with that. Yeah. Lobbying has its place, of course. Yeah. In terms of raising awareness and putting political pressure on these governments. Yeah, definitely have that. Yeah.
Just taking the topic in a certain direction, but it still links to this. Obviously, there was a time where you worked for Basics as well, right?
Yeah.
Which we can speak about. And just from my own experiences coming into Sikhi, I know something that Bhai Ranveer Singh Ji used to say a lot was this idea of like the plan B, that we are plan B and waiting for plan A, as in like a Sant Ji or somebody who's got all those qualities going to come and help us lead. So just two questions. Just one, talk about experiences with Basics. What did you used to do back in the day for Basics? And maybe just this vichar as well. What do you think about the vichar that until that day comes, we're not just going to wait around and just play PlayStation or just go and have nice tasty langar. What can we be doing in this period of time and until that day comes, if that is that day, or what's your vichar on this whole thing? Basically?
Sure. Yeah. So with Basics, like I said before, I lived literally two streets down from Ranveer Singh. By Ranveer Singh, and I remember actually the first time I met him. You remember, Saka do the cycle ride from like Birmingham to London. So I was doing like motorbikes, like just helping with this seva and security of that, right? And Ranveer Singh was pedaling, and no joke, right? We're somewhere in Luton coming down, and I can see he's like sweating. He's obviously been cycling for like a day and a half now, and I ride past him. First interaction, it says Fateh, Singh, we've got to get Khalsa Raj. Singh, come on, we've got the thing. And that's just how he was, and it wasn't like he was putting it on. But our first conversation in that evening was about just Khalsa Raj, how great the Khalsa was.
So did he know that you were involved in these?
No. This is the first time we ever met.
Was you involved in these circles either at the time?
No, I was kind of just getting into it. This would have been like 2013. So I think I was involved with NSYF.
Yeah.
It might actually been before that. Might have been 2011. I can't remember now, but it's very early on. This was actually before he started Basics. Yeah, just before that. So that was it. So right from the get-go, like everyone knows this about Ranveer Singh, that he was very charismatic, very passionate, obviously very well read, in that sense, and he had this pull. Right, you were just infatuated by him and the way he would speak, and he could really kind of bring you in. So for me, like he was somebody who always kind of stood out from that interaction. And then when I realized that we lived really close to each other, then obviously a bit more kind of Sangat developed. And then at the time, I was kind of involved with like the Khalsa bikers thing. We were doing charity bike rides, nothing like Panth in that sense in terms of political education, more so just seva. And then when Basics was started, there was a handful of us that used to work together. So I spent 9 months, I think, with Basics. And initially it was just helping with like translation of the videos, video editing, some street prachar went on together as well.
I think you're in some of the videos? Or?
Possibly, yeah. And then Jeevan Singh did this very early kind of learning Gurmukhi series. Yeah. And we were sitting there, we were recording it, and then we obviously do the... So very early on. And then what happened was, I soon realized that in 2014, my focus was more towards a political education. So then I decided that actually it would be better for me to focus on that. Like, if you have one lane that you can concentrate on, you put your all into it. Yeah. So I then started do more seva, I guess, with NSYF, and then obviously the book began, and then it's kind of just gone from there. But that was kind of my time with Basics. And obviously we've kept in touch, with various sevadars, including yourselves, and always having that love and kind of desire to work together. This is one example of that. And then the other question about, you said this like plan A and plan B. I think like just as Sikhs, this idea of like being realistic, like we've never had this like Messiah complex where we're waiting for someone to come and save us, right? There's never really existed in our itihas, and even now it doesn't exist. But it's because like the Guru has given us everything we need to move forward, and they've not just given it to us in terms of Gurbani, but there's also their examples of how to actually mobilize. So I think as long as we're moving, right, as long as we're doing, not just doing something, but doing something productive for the Panth, in whatever field that is, whether it's education, whether it's lobbying, whether it's the other side of things. That's, I think, it's as long as we're not stagnant. That's a key thing.
One thing that just came to mind, if anything, you've worked for like so many different Sikh charities, like Khalsa, Basics, NSYF, or you've done CR with so many different groups, right? So which one was the best group?
I'll tell you off camera.
Do that in as well.
No, but I've been blessed in that way because I've had good sangat with really good individuals, and not just individuals at the within the organizations, but by extension the work they do. The interactions that I've had in the wider sangat as well. Been really blessed.
And actually, it's important to have that collaboration, because even with us guys, we've noticed so much that when we actually reached out to other organizations and started doing like with Saving Punjab, with Shamsher Singh, look at what can be achieved by doing that stuff. So it's so important that we kind of get rid of this. Sometimes people have a bit of like a subtle ego that we can't associate with them, but really we all want the same Gurudas Sikh, so we should be working together.
100%. And Bhai Ranveer used to say this about how actually 95% of things we actually agree on. It's just the 5%, and even the 5%, that's the minor. We'll resolve that once we get Khalistan, right? So there is a lot more that obviously unites us.
And VG made a good point about your seva in different organizations, doing this over 10 years now. I think one important question to ask is hardship. Have you faced any hardship? If you don't mind speaking about that, how have you navigated yourself through that to get to where you are today as well? Because we're all going to face hard times, isn't it? And times, because this is difficult. Like VG's part of a committee, and I think whatever small politics I face is hard to endure. And he's like, bro, what stuff you're talking about is minor to me. So like, how do you navigate through hardship?
Because we're always thinking, is it worth it? We can just go to a nice normal job.
Sure. Yeah. I think everything is relative. Like when you put things into perspective, it's difficult to navigate some spaces, especially within the way committee systems work. Or even sometimes, some things get a bit nasty with other organizations or groups. But ultimately, like in the grand scale of things, that's how I kind of see it. Like, what are we actually doing? And therefore, then the point you mentioned earlier about how we're all trying to pull towards the same direction, you have to have that level of like nimrata, in the sense that you don't have all the answers yourself. So for me, it's also an opportunity to learn from others as well. And I think like the question about, it's actually deeper than that in terms of the question of hardship, because there's hardship like on the personal level, but then you kind of almost offset that with the wider Sangat and the Panth. And the Panth itself obviously is greater than just us guys in the UK, right? There's much greater hardships that others are facing. So that's what I'm saying, it's relative, and you put things into perspective, you kind of realize actually it's not too bad. We're not in the trenches, right? We're not there doing that stuff. We're still trying to do something, and it's difficult, but Chalo, whatever Seva Guru Sahib, gives us, we're going to do the best of our ability. And for me, that's why, I realized, early on that I have a genuine passion for reading and writing, right? And the books that I've been able to produce, that's kind of shown with that. And people often ask, how do you find the time and blah blah blah, and it's like, I just like doing it. So when you genuinely like doing something and it's a passion of yours, you'll make the time, you'll prioritize that things, and it just happens to be that it's also producing work that is going to be hopefully helpful to Sikh children and future generations.
We haven't really spoken about it in much detail, but can you tell us more about the books that you do have then with Khalis House and so on?
Yeah, so Khalis House in itself has published 30 plus books, and at the moment it's actually the busiest time it's been for Khalis House. We're working with 9 different authors from across the diaspora. So it's a really exciting time.
What actually goes into that? Like, what's the work behind it?
So essentially what would happen is somebody would submit a manuscript. They'd be like, this is my idea. So we have like a submission form on the website, working title, what the book is about, why there's a need for it, who are you kind of thing, your background, why now, that sort of thing. They submit that. And then there's an initial kind of conversation, just an informal conversation about the project and how soon it'll be ready. And then what we have is a very kind of formal, we have a contract with all of our authors. It's very clear from the offset in black and white, copyright, royalties. So the idea behind Khalis House was to also reward the authors as well. So I don't mind speaking about this, but like, in the kind of conventional publishing world, the publishers take a big chunk of the royalties. And that's another reason why also I decided it'd be good for our writers to empower them, right? To give them more. So they get, so we've kind of, our breakdown of royalties is a lot better than the standard you'd get in mainstream publishing. And the part of that is to give back to the community as well. So then once the contract is signed, then it's just a case of finalizing the manuscript. So if there are illustrations, we'd get an illustrator involved, subcontract that out or whatever it might be. Sometimes the author has somebody in mind, and then just bringing the book together. And it's actually a fairly straightforward process. The longest part is the editing process. So depending on what type of book it is, how much time is required to go through the proofread and do the actual copy edit. But beyond that, in terms of book design and promotion, that's all kind of does it itself. At the moment,
you're pretty hands-on in sense of like the proofreading and putting it together.
Yeah, definitely, yeah. So at the moment, we're working with an author in Australia, Benji Jasleen, who's written one of the most beautiful poetry books that I've ever come across. And it's basically the Penthi Akkar, and there's a poem attributed to each Akkar, all in Ustad of Akal Purakh. It's amazing, and I can't wait for that one to come out. So it just goes to show that once you have
in English or Punjabi,
it's in Punjabi.
Oh wow!
Yeah, it's beautiful. It's really beautiful. And then there's a couple of children's books. Baljit Singh's working on his book as well at the moment.
Tell us about Baljit Singh's book. When is it coming out?
You have to ask Baljit Singh. No, I'm joking. I think it was actually, to be fair, we were hoping for it to arrive last year in October, because obviously the assassination, 31st October. And then because this is the first time a book of this nature has been written about these two surme, or three surme, and actually we felt that you almost get this kind of like, are we good enough to write this, right? And I think that's been a part of it, but also want to make sure that you check everything past the family. So there's been a bit of back and forth, checking, key kind of moments that come out from the book, and also the book itself, the main kind of source, who's narrating the kind of the Jeevani of Bhai Satwan Singh, they're still alive. So there is that added dynamic of, is it safe for them? And it is, because it is just a history book in that sense. It's re-narrating, but obviously it's of a certain narrative. So that's what's caused a bit of a slight delay with that. But we're hoping to have it completed in the next kind of month or two. I think that's the plan.
Just before you come in the book stuff, G, not to jumping in, but what you made a point there about when people don't feel like they're good enough to do something. What would be your vichar to that when people say that? Because we hear that all the time.
Yeah, no, I hear it all the time.
And even Baljit Singh was saying,
which
is his nimrata.
Yeah. And I felt it as well. Like it's called
imposter syndrome.
Imposter syndrome. That's it. Yeah, you get that. It's just inevitable. And for us, I guess we feel it more because as like Shardalus of the Guru, as like we have that, we're Panth Dardis in that sense, right? So we know of the Mahan like scholars that came before us, and for us we'll never be that level, right? So it's like, but I think the thing is for me is like the point I made earlier about you've still got to do something, and what is it you're actually doing, right? And I think it does have to be of a certain standard, and that's where like the wider Sangat will come in. So like when Patshahi Mehima was written, I sent it out to like multiple things, people who I kind of valued, and had them kind of read it and really kind of tear it apart in places. So that's where you have to then lean upon the wider Sangat for that, for that assistance. But it's anyone watching, you're not alone if you do feel that way. But the key thing I think is just to keep moving forward. Don't let that be an obstacle to stop any work or seva you're thinking of doing.
Carry on as well with the books.
So that essentially is the publishing process, and then the books then published and they're available from our website, from Amazon distribution as well. And even though we're like an independent publishing house, we can't really compete with the likes of Amazon in terms of global distribution. They offer you they take a sizable chunk, but they offer you kind of next day delivery. So somebody sat in like California can order one of our books and it gets delivered within a day or two. So we have that.
I remember seeing there was like a GoFundMe for Khalistan House or Khalis House. What was that?
Freudian slip. No, there was. Last year we did a fundraising campaign because the idea was because of the way in which the publishing house had kind of developed and moved forward, we decided actually it'd be great to bring the actual printing of it in-house. So up until that point, even though we're publishing the manuscripts and dealing with the marketing and the promotion, the actual printing of the books would be outsourced. So to a company in London or Manchester, wherever it might have been. So we just thought that it'd be great because it has been a success and there is still a kind of a need for this. Let's purchase our own
Printing press.
Printing press, yeah. Wow. So it's a commercial printing press, binder. It's a full kind of setup, and I was genuinely like humble. Like, we put the GoFundMe page up, and I think we reached the target within about 2 months. Wow. So it was like, again, and that gives you a bit of Hansel as well, because you know, you see these donations coming in, and I would say like 70% of the donations that came in, I don't know who they were. So it's really kind of reassuring, you know, that they see value in that. So yeah, so the printing press, full printing press.
So where's that, in your living room?
You know what? It's funny. It was actually in my living room. No, it wasn't. No, it was. So it's actually it's where I live, but we've got like an outbuilding. So it is actually in house. It's actually our in-house publishing.
Yeah,
so we
like a board, Khalistan.
Not quite yet. No, not quite. But it's in-house. So any paperback books are published through through that press. But any kind of hardbacks that come about, we still outsource for that. But it gives you full control, you know, like even things like people, we wrote a couple of manuscript submissions where, you know, like handling the book is very important, right? So not so as to avoid BRB and stuff. And you kind of lose control of that if you're handing it to some random Gora company. Right? You don't know how they're handling the books. So that's a really good, it's really reassuring to know that, you know, it's being done in a certain way, and I've got full oversight over that.
Do you deal with Gurbani then in that respect? Any types of...
So then we have had not up until now, but we have had somebody message me the other day about publishing, because obviously this year is 350 years since the Shahid Guru Tegh Bahadur Ji. So they're looking to do a project where they're looking at the Saloks, also Salok Malanoma and Guru Sahib's Bani, and he did ask, look, the idea was to have it as a PDF only, but if you're handling the books, then maybe we can have that conversation. So that might be coming up going forward as well. So again, it shows, you know, if you have these, you know, in my opinion, personally, it's not a dig at any Gurdwara, but, you know, printing presses should be a part and parcel with the Gurdwara. Like that, I think the only one that I've ever seen was the one at Stockton Gurdwara, which was when the Guddar started. And obviously outside of SGPC, and that's separate. But here, I don't think any Gurdwara, correct me if I'm wrong, actually has their own printing press, which is, it is what it is.
It's interesting, because I remember, I think it was Bhai Ranveer Singh Ji and Ustad Jeevan Singh Ji, when they published the first Nanak Prakash, they'd actually go to where it was being printed. Wow. Bhai Ranveer Singh would watch the whole process to make sure that there was no BRB being done. But the thing is that, I don't know if they were Sikh, but why should we have to go to those lengths to do that when we should have something in the house where it's already kind of been taken care of? Is that something where you'd like to go in the future in terms of being able to offer that service and seva?
Definitely.
Wow. Even like the delivery process, right? Because you can't necessarily trust if they handle those with Satgar. So that's another whole issue. You know, that
Khalis House deliveries.
Khalis deliveries coming soon. You heard it here first.
Shocking.
Well, where did the name come from? The Khalis House.
So Khalis, obviously, it's
not Khalistan House.
It's an Arabic word, as well as a word from the Sanskrit language. So in the Sanskrit language, Khalis means pure, and that's the most common kind of interpretation of the word. Actually, in Farsi is one that I prefer, because Khalis means independent.
Nice.
So Khalis, so it ties really nicely with what we're trying to do, and then obviously there is a kind of a nod of appreciation to Khalistan as well. So it's just my way of kind of, you know, because when we set it up, the idea was, you know, we talked earlier about like institution building and how we're operating. So, you know, when we have Khalistan, I would very much want to see more of these type of institutions where we're, you know, empowering the Sikhs. So that's
it kind of leads on to what's your vision for the future of Khalis House? So
I think continue to produce like as many books as we possibly can, and hopefully, you know, people I've seen over the past like 5 years, it'll be 5 years in June, that they are of a certain caliber, of a certain standard, and we're genuinely, you know, we're not in this for profit, is it? Because, you know, I still work and others who are involved. This is really about building, you know, a strong institution for the Sikhs, and being a place where, you know, a Sikh aspiring writer can come and you know, have their books published. And even with like the other book, I didn't mention, like with Gulab Kaur, for example, when I wrote that, like, you know, you never really know how far it might go or who it might touch and stuff, but like that came out last year, and very little genuinely is known about Bibi Gulab Kaur, and what you do find online is kind of a lot of regurgitation of the same kind of thing. So anyway, when I went out, there was a Singh in Germany, of all places, who was doing his undergrad dissertation in English literature, and he decided to do it upon Bibi Gulab Kaur, the novel. So it was amazing to see how, like, you know, a book that you've produced is going beyond just like someone reading it, whereby they're now having discourse within universities, looking at, because his whole thesis is about like looking at the colonial encounter through Sikh literature, and he kind of compared the book with one of Khushwant Singh's other prior novels. So it's it's showcasing how far it can go. It goes beyond just the reader, because you're trying to build a part of building a narrative is obviously then having an impact on future generations and wider discourse. So I get the opportunity to do that as well, and it's great.
And one side is impacting readers, but then can you give an example of how it's impacted an author, an aspiring author who maybe was struggling to get it published, and then they came through you?
Yeah, no, we have had that before, like specifically with Rani Sadakaur, for example. Rani Sadakaur, I think, was the first book that really touched people, in the sense that you're centering a pivotal Sikh female character from our Itihas, and an entire book is dedicated to her. We don't really have that in English. It just very rarely exists. In Punjabi, there are novels. This is the thing. So part of the inspiration behind Rani Sadakaur was when I came across Gyani Tarlok Singh wrote a novel in Punjabi in the 1950s. And even that is such an interest. It's just funny how things just land in your lap sometimes. I was at the Guru Card Library, and this was before like the idea of the book was born. And I was looking for a specific book, and I was finalizing Patshahi Mehima at the time. And I just saw that this very small, rough kind of cover book, and it was like Rani Sadakaur, Gurmukhi language script. And I just opened it and I was like, oh, okay, this seems interesting. Took it home and stuff, left it on my desk for maybe a week, and then I picked it up. I read that book, and my Punjabi at the time wasn't great in terms of reading speed. I read that book in about 3 days straight, because I was so engrossed in the whole story. And I realized that, we had this tradition before, because Gyani Tarlok Singh is writing this novel in the 1950s, and he's also published other works as well about other Sikh personalities. And so for me, it was like, we need to have these types of stories in English as well, because whether we can do a critique of the English language and how maybe detrimental it is to the Sikhs, but actually we still engage with English. It's how a lot of, especially in the West, it's the language that we use, right? So
and I remember growing up, there's like the Warrior Princess. Do you know that book? And bedtime stories.
That's right. Yeah.
All these, like, they're simple books, but they have an impact on
100%. Yeah, definitely. So that was that book in itself. People have said to me that it's really been inspiring, and it's given them an opportunity to look at even other characters or other personalities rather from our house. And that's the main aim, right? To inspire. It sounds cliched, but inspire the next generation. Maybe inspiring is a strong word. Maybe definitely making them feeling empowered about their history. Yeah.
So how have you felt like in now the new age of like social media, people's attention spans is like crazy short? How has that kind of like worked out with you? You're writing long form books and novels and stuff. Like, are people still interested in this stuff, or like is it more difficult to get people interested? Or?
I think it's difficult to measure, because I don't really have any like thing to measure it with, apart from like the book sales. But relatively speaking, they're still being ordered from all over, really. I've not had anyone say that that they haven't found it helpful or anything like that. And I think this also probably applies to like other organizations as well. There is this move towards short form content. It's a quick instant dopamine hit, like you feel good about it and all the rest of that. And you can certainly take like a long form project like the book and do that and create snippets and the rest of it. But I think there's something quite like beautiful and unique about sitting with a book and reading a book. Because like, especially in Punjabi, obviously most of the books that we produced have been in English. But if for those who are watching and listening, just sitting down with a Punjabi novel, because it's effortless. Because what the author can do in Punjabi is weave in like a Gurbani, the whole culture, the Sikh culture can come into it, and it's such a powerful form of learning about our history. Earlier I think you might mention about like non-fiction and fiction work, and that in itself also was a bit of a challenge, because like with the Baba Deep Singh book, even with the Gulab Kaur book, like how do you kind of reconcile a fiction, because it's a novel, right? So it's a fiction work. These are characters that I've kind of created and character arcs and to supplement, but at the center of it is the main kind of gist of the moral of the story, so to speak, and that remains unchanged. So and this is just a form of storytelling, and it's important that we engage in that.
And there's many different mediums of storytelling, right? Via video, writing, and all that stuff. But so who's your favorite Sikh author?
It changes depending on like who I'm reading or like what I'm doing. At the moment, my favorite writer from like a non-fiction perspective is probably Dr. Gurbagat Singh. Relatively recent, right? He's passed away now though. But he's like a postmodernist. So he's like his entire writing style is completely unique. Like for example, like how he explains like Naam, for example, right? He'll talk about like how the Guru's word, how Gurbani has the power to change your biophysical makeup of the body. So it's just a different way to to interpret what Sikhi is and what Naam and the Guru Shabad is. So he's one of my favorite ones at the moment. But there are so many. We're so blessed in that sense as well. We do have genuinely so many great writers from our house.
Yeah. Just another question now with a lot of like AI and like ChatGPT and large language models. Do you think there's a risk of that, like kind of lowering the bar of like or standard of what Sikh writing is? Because people are just going to turn to that to like produce.
Yeah, there is a risk. Inevitably, there is a risk. But you can tell when something's been written by AI. You can, but you just tell. I think AI is great for like brainstorming, mind mapping, generating ideas, giving maybe even a structure, right? But you can't rely on AI because AI has been programmed by somebody, and that somebody is a human somewhere, right? Or a combination of different minds coming together, and they have done that based on a particular worldview. So you're never gonna get a Sikh. You might get like a structure which you can then bring Sikhi into. So in that sense, it's a great tool to have, to utilize. But just don't rely on it.
That's how we started using before. Like now we can tell when someone's used AI for their titles on YouTube. Right. It's like because ChatGPT would have given us a similar.
Right. So example. You've seen it before.
I can tell when someone's doing it now. I think we tried at one point. Now we use it as a tool to help build our structure as well. Right. Just something else to talk about, which links to this as well, G, if you don't mind, a bit of your personal life in terms of you don't do this full time, right?
Right.
This isn't your job, but you have a full-time job?
I have a full-time job, yeah.
And so how do you balance the two? And you got a family as well, right?
Yeah.
So how are you balancing all these things at the same time?
So like I was saying earlier, like, when you're passionate about something, you genuinely just make the time for it.
Yeah.
And people often ask, how does it happen? But like you just give up things that you find no real value in, like you rather than just like scrolling or watching a Netflix, binge watching something. I still do that, so you still have to have that outlet as well. Yeah. But for me, like I've kind of just learned to prioritize this because I see the importance of it, and two, I genuinely feel good when I'm doing it. Like it's a genuine passion. So yeah, I work for Scottish government. Because I work in the public sector, they're quite flexible. So I do a 4-day condensed week. Okay. So it's brilliant. 2 days in the office, 2 days at home. And then Fridays really is the day where you'll find me like, behind the Khalis House laptop.
So message you on Friday.
Fridays is the day. Fridays is the day, yeah. But obviously there are other days where, evenings or, early mornings or whatever. So you've got to find that balance, especially if you're trying to do this part-time. The ultimate aim is to actually make it a full-time venture. And, based on the trajectory of where we're going, hopefully that will happen soon. But there's no rush there. I'm quite comfortable and stuff in that sense. I want to make sure we're doing it organically and doing it properly. Don't want to go full time and then have to stop after 6 months, right? So making sure you do that properly. And even with the kids, like it's great because the kids kind of get to see this world as well, like the world of literature. There's, like I said before, having visually in your house, like in the household, not having the TV as a centerpiece, even though we have a TV in the center of the living room, but like, having those books around because you can spark the child's conversation. My youngest, Rajat, he's only 5 and the others didn't really do this, but he now just brings a book, like he'll pick up a book and he'll say, Papa, let's read this. So I definitely, I would hugely recommend any parents watching or listening, do center books. Even if they're not Sikh books to begin with, just reading is so important. Developing that that kind of love for books, I think, is hugely important.
Yeah. And also, you train a lot as well in the gym.
Yeah.
My question.
I've gone back into it. Yeah. You know what? That actually helps. That discipline.
Yeah.
Like you guys will know. If anyone who goes to the gym and stuff, it gives you a grounding, and it generally helps in that discipline. Being self-motivated and having that discipline. There are still days where like I'll miss the gym or I'll have like maybe a slower day or whatever. But actually, when you go to the gym, it's not always about the physical, it's about your mental fortitude. Yeah, it definitely helps with that. Yeah.
What type of training do you do? You don't mind asking. More bodybuilding?
Yeah, more kind of weights. I did try like mobility for a little while because I was I'm going to be shifting from Tarna Dal to Buddha Dal very soon. So I did, I had to joints, Gurde Dukhan Lag Pande, that kind of thing. So, but I've there's a pump you get from weights where you can't really beat that. So I've gone back to, and the consistency is really, really important, with that. You've got to stick with it. but it helps. Yeah,
That's cool, man.
yeah,
It's interesting. Like you mentioned, like training and like your family and writing and seva and work, and like for some people it's so difficult to like find a balance with doing all of these things, right? And like I remember we spoke to one of our stars, Ustad Jatinder Singh from East London.
Yeah.
And when we asked him this question, he was like, it's impossible to find a balance like that. Just make Sikhi your like prime aim, and then everything else will come from that.
Yeah.
Now, if you just immerse yourself in Sikhi,
Yeah.
all of these other things, you can find fitness, you can find family, all that within the Sikhi lens, you know?
Yeah.
But that if you make that your like more, then that could be the way.
Yeah,
You know?
absolutely. I think it's like for example, fitness is not like alien to Sikhi. It's either being tiyar par tiyar, physically active to serve the Panth. As you know, in many ways, it's a good thing to be doing. And then and it's just priorities. That's what it comes down to. And there are a lot of distractions, and especially in today's day and age, you mentioned like social media, AI, and all this rest of it. But at the same time, the Sikh we take from Guru Sahib is not to reject the world either. So we do live in the world. I mean, I've got young kids, so I've got their needs to attend to with my wife. So you have to kind of just find the time to navigate all those spaces. Yeah.
Do you ever get into a situation where you look at a task, you think this is so big, I'm just going to procrastinate, I'm going to do something else? I'm firing a shot at Kartarpur here, by the way, at the same time.
I can't think of an example, man, because for me, like I've got this mindset where like I see it as a challenge. So rather than like thinking, oh, it's too much, my mind will go into this mode where finding out a way to make it happen. And I'm quite methodical in that sense. So like even if it means starting small, like looking at it from like the timetable, like okay, on a day-to-day basis, what do I need to be hitting to be for the ultimate? Might be like a 6-month project. Am I hitting those initial goals? Okay. Because I think part of it is that because sometimes the project is so big, it's very like daunting. Like, oh, where do I begin?
Yeah.
And so to avoid that, you've got to start small and make them achievable targets. And then it kind of and actually it works really well within the publishing world because you actually work like that. You have to go through certain milestones to get to the end product.
You can't write a book in a day, you know?
No, of course not. No, unless you ask ChatGPT. Yeah. In which case, actually, we had a submission relatively recently. Yeah. And it just knew instantly because the facts were there, but there was no emotion. And the thing with a novel is what gets you is the emotion that's attached to the words. It was just very flat, and I had to like just very politely refuse the manuscript, right? So people are trying it, but yeah, don't submit manuscripts on ChatGPT.
Just another question, like what would you be one piece of advice you would say to like your younger self if you were to like look back and say that, oh, this is something you need to do
more mobility work?
yeah, exactly. Less football on concrete playgrounds. That's a really good question. I often see other people like get asked that question. What would I say to my younger self? I think I might have mentioned it earlier, but like just continue to move. Like don't get stagnant. You will have days, maybe weeks, months where you do feel a bit down or things are not going as well. But the key really is to remain active and on that front. And also be mindful of like what the purpose is. What is it you're trying to achieve and for what end. And that I think that's really kind of helped me along the way. And always having that as well is really important. Like for example, the first book came out. And I never actually had the thought of like, I've done the book now, 7 years done, partly because I really enjoyed it. But then secondly, like I genuinely saw that there was a need for this narrative. Like narrative is so important.
Yeah.
And it's not as if like I'm inventing something new because a lot of the information I'm taking exists in the Punjabi novels or the Puratan Granths. They're just not as accessible to today's readership as they once were. So having a purpose, I guess, really helps.
Bhai Sahib, I think before you even asked that question, you answered. That was my biggest takeaway from this podcast was just keep moving because I feel like that's such a big help in just even in my own life right now. Just when we face challenges, just keep going and just keep trying to push barriers. How do you sit with the idea of failure? Are you afraid to fail? Are you happy? Like what I mean by that is, sometimes like we like to try new things and we're good kid, but I feel like, especially me more because he's a bit more vapor like that. I'm more happy to kind of do something. I know there's a potential of failing,
right?
But I'm happy to fail quickly,
right,
and then move on. Like, how do you see that? Because starting your own, business institute, it's a big thing, right? So like, how do you sit with this idea and what vichar would you give to the Sangat about failing in a positive light? If you get what I mean,
yeah. No, I get it. I've never really been fearful of the failure. I've had like apprehension or like I've been anxious about a certain task, and primarily because, you know, am I worthy of doing it in that sense, right? I look at my own jivan, I know what my own shortcomings are. But it's never been a case of like, I'm not going to do this because of like it might fall flat on his face. I'd still give it a go. And there's probably been multiple like things that we've done in the past that haven't perhaps gone the way that I've wanted them to.
Yeah.
But like I said, you just kind of continue to move forward. You continue to try it. Because the thing is, there's loads of work to be done, right? Within the wider Panth. Let's just go outside of like our circles in the UK, the wider Panth in that sense. So there is so much work to be done. So you can choose a particular like lane or particular field that you feel you have to have the passion for it.
Yeah.
That's the number one thing. You have to enjoy it. You can't really be doing something that you're there just for the sake of being there, right? So it has to be something you enjoy, something you feel passionate about, and something from which you feel a sense of achievement. Because we are still humans at the end of the day, right? You need that like a reassurance or sense of like gratification that, you know, this has been accomplished. And not on like a personal level in that sense, ego, but more so that, you know, you feel good about it. So I'm going to now continue to do more of it. Yeah, that's how I would kind of. That's how I'd view it, yeah.
And you know, actually having that like sense of purpose is actually more liberating. You've got something to aim towards.
Yeah.
One more question was, any books on the pipeline that you're writing yourself?
So there's the 8 or 9 that I mentioned with other authors. The one that I'm working on is actually an expansion of my master's thesis. So I recently did an MA in philosophy. Nice. And it's looking more so at like kind of Sikh ideology more so, but also tying it to the Udasis. Like the kind of the main kind of question, if you want to ask it, is why does the Guru Nanak Dev Ji Maharaj, why do they not go beyond Baghdad from the references that we have towards the West?
Interesting.
Given what was happening, given what had taken place, you know, why did they return to Punjab in that moment? And there has been like some accounts I've recently posted about it on Instagram about people are saying Guru Sahib went to Rome, but there's no verified. The Vatican, some say like Turkey, some even say like South America and like Maharaja everywhere.
The Turkey one I've checked out. Even Bhai Ranveer Singh checked it. Remember he talked about that. Yeah. And there is a statue there, but it's like a coincidence. It's not actually.
Yeah. And actually, the guy who initially suggested it, he actually went back, in all fairness to him, and said that actually upon further kind of investigation, it's not been verified. So, in fact, by Gurdas, you would have mentioned it. I think he mentions everything else. They make no reference to it. So actually, the thing is, you look at, you know, why do we have this fascination with it? It's because we live in the West, and for us, you know, the West is kind of the center of the world, right? But back in those days, the West was nothing. The West didn't exist.
That's the conclusion.
That's pretty much the conclusion. Yeah, you have to read it. And then, no, but there's more to. But the thing is, this is why like non-fiction works are so good, because you have the opportunity to delve into so many different like ideas as well. But the main focus is going to be heavily on that. Yeah,
because there's also a website I remember which has documented like. Always tries to document like
Satguru Weebly, I think it is.
Yeah, and like Guru Sahib went to like America and met the Native American Indians.
That's right. Yeah. I know, it's crazy. I know. Yeah. But maybe they did. Maybe it hasn't been, you know, haven't surfaced yet. But for me, the reason for this is because there is this fascination with the West, and there's something that's quite prevalent for a lot of the issues we've actually talked about in terms of governance and structure and how we be. But it's to kind of debunk the self-professed supremacy of the West. That's kind of what I'm going to be looking at.
And you know what? There's also another interesting aspect of like people who actually got darshan of Guru Sahibs in other places that like even in Africa, in Kenya, you know, there was even like the indigenous people there, the Kale, they got darshan of Guru Gobind Singh Ji, and then they built a Guru Ghar there. A lot of the Sikh today at Sohar Road, Nishkam, Sevak Datha, they originated from that. Right. So there's the whole different kind of way you could
interpret that. Yeah, definitely.
I was going to drop the patala. That might into different worlds, so maybe they could. But this is great though, and definitely because there's something to think about. That actually is it just based upon just Western vichar and people trying to, and also us trying to fit in and please the, excuse me for saying it, the white man kind of thing, which is what we see a lot in today's world as well. So
after that, PhD or
you know what, I actually I started a PhD in September just gone, and I realized that it was just too much. That was too much to juggle, because the PhD really requires your full attention. And I wasn't able to give it that with my work and, you know, Khalis. And also, like I spoke to a few of the things, and it was like, you know, the effort you're going to put into a PhD, if you invest that time and money into Khalis to get it to where you want it to be, that's probably going to be a better thing. So I kind of just, I started it and then I left.
Do you know the funny thing is, a lot of the elders, even like the committee wale, they always like, oh, if it's a doctor, you know, PhD wala, then they feel it's more credible. Whereas if it's a Sikh scholar who's not come through this PhD system, they don't value that as much.
Yeah, I think part of it is because obviously a PhD is very difficult to do. It's peer reviewed. You know, you have to go through a certain checks and balances. You know, your supervisor will see everything from an academic perspective. But in many ways, like, I'm not saying I've done this, but others who have gone to live in the dulls and have actually had, you know, that actual course for 9 months or 18 months, whatever it might be.
No, not even that. Like Gyani Singhs will learn like 9-10 granths until they even consider as a starting out Gyani, right?
Yeah, and I think a part of it is because, like, you know, the thing you mentioned about the white man, right? Those standards that have been set, we're constantly trying to reach those standards. So if you have a PhD, and this is not a knock at anyone with a PhD, I think it's great, but it's given primacy over other forms of scholarship. Yeah.
I was going to ask about NSYF just in general. I know it's a bit of a random question, but just a bit about the Seva, because again, we're blessed to spend time with the other things with NSYF. Just how did it start? And just a bit about the team.
So NSYF, the National Sikh Youth Federation, started. You remember we had the I Pledge Orange campaign with by Rajwana? Started after that, and the idea very much was, there's a big Akat held in Birmingham, I think, and some matte were passed, and essentially the idea was to have an organization based on Sikh political education. And then, so obviously over the years, you know, the group has done like the exhibitions on 84. So there's been a heavy focus on 84 and understanding 84 and our history from that perspective. But what we found is over the years, like each one of us has kind of taken up our own kind of line that would interest us. So I've gone more towards sovereignty, Patshahi, the Guru's Darbar, and like Baljit Singh, for example, has focused on like, you know, 1984 and the build up to that. Shamsher Singh is more kind of, I guess, on the ideology, working now also with Khalistan Centre as well. So it's kind of just also evolved in and of itself as well. The actual Jathebandi still exists, obviously. We're still active in that sense. But we've also then gone into other forms of kind of seva, if you like, and groups. So, yeah.
And just another one is that what was the cause for you moving to Glasgow, leaving busy London life, the rat race, and then going where there's a lot of Sangat as well, and just randomly going all the way up to Scotland? What was the reason for that?
Part of it was because my wife and I obviously have a young family, and you know, living in Hayes or living in London generally, it's very difficult to firstly get on the property ladder, and this was obviously 6 years ago, so it's probably got even worse now.
Yeah, it's crazy.
So that was a big part of it. You know, like we wanted to live in a place where we could bring the kids up in a relative comfort and stuff, and you know, and you just get more value for your money up north. And my sister lives in Glasgow, so it's not as if we didn't know anyone there. There is some Sangat that I met before we moved, and now, you know, 6.5 years on, it's like I wouldn't move back in the nicest way possible. Like I do, we were talking about earlier, like I do miss the Sangat in the sense that there is more happening in London and in Birmingham. There's a lot more, just generally more things happening during the week, especially from the Panthic side of things. Up in Scotland, it's probably less so. There is good things like in terms of like Santya classes happen, you know, the Dharmic Gurmat Prachar takes place.
Is that Bhaijus Deep Singh?
Bhaijus Deep Singh is up there, yeah, that's right. He's the kind of main kind of sevadar on that front in Glasgow. He's actually my brother-in-law. Oh, good. Yeah, so there is good Sangat there.
Yeah, and it's just saying that because your brother-in-law, he actually
he's a top Singh. And what was I going to say? So there is less Sangat, but it's quite close knit, and it's really nice actually, because you know, like in South, or like even when I used to live here, if we'd come to the Gurdwara, Havelock, Park Avenue, you'd almost see someone different each time, which is nice as well. But up there, you kind of know everyone, and it's a different kind of vibe in that sense. You know, so obviously we're like 40 minutes from the Highlands. You know, the water is kind of better in that sense. You know, air is you definitely feel the difference living up there. And also, I would say that the Scots are nicer people than the English as well. Generally speaking, they've got more time for you. When they say that, the more north you go, the nicer people get. So yeah, lucky in that sense. And we're settled. The kids are settled in school. It's funny because the kids actually, they picked up the accent.
I was about to say to you, you haven't got the accent.
No, I haven't. No, so my wife and I, we're still like Cockney, right? We're still London. But those guys,
You don't even have a Leeds accent.
no, I know I lost the Leeds accent when I was here. But so the kids, term time, they go full Scottish to the point where we don't even understand them. There's a Scottish poet called Robert Burns, and so in the school they learn about him and they do his poetry.
Yeah.
And my eldest Veer Singh came home one day and he had to recite for the assembly. Didn't understand a word of what he said, and he was talking for 4 minutes. No joke, man.
Yeah.
But the funny thing is that holidays they revert back, so they switch. So if they're spending time here with family or whatever, we go on holiday, they go kind of. So it's interesting to see how the kids are so adaptable in that sense. But yeah, even now when we talk to like, if I ring like a business or ring like the car dealership or something, sometimes I've got to like ask them to repeat themselves, because especially in Glasgow, the accent is so like strong, the Glaswegian accent. Edinburgh less so, because it's more multicultural, more diverse, and you get more of a vibrant kind of crowd. But yeah, it's something we're still navigating. But it's good. Good fun. Yeah.
Good budgie.
If someone wants to get in touch with you or learn more about Khalis House, like what would you send them?
So the best way is just to email info@khalishouse.com or ranveersingh@khalishouse.com. The Instagram, we do monitor the Instagram messages as well, but the best thing is just via the email. Yeah.
And for someone who's not necessarily going to be an author or just like going to get involved in that ever, how can they support Khalis House if they're interested in?
Yeah, that's a great question. Actually, we've had that before. So it would be great if you, for example, can offer like copy editing services or proofreading something. Checking manuscripts is a big part of what we do. So again, just get in contact via the email, and we do obviously offer paid services for that. So get involved if you can assist with that.
Thank you so much, Bhai Sahib, for coming on. It's been a long time, overdue, and hopefully, Guru Kirpa God, in the future we can continue to work together as well on different projects. Any ideas that you have, please let us know. And thank you so much to the Sangat. Please leave any questions in the comment section. And again, we leave all links to Bhai Sahib Ji Seva, Khalis House, and so on. And we'll be back in the next